Hello everyone, I'm the Dream Teller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never wanted to share this story online, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. My wife Emily and I have been trying to make sense of what happened to us last summer, and honestly, I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. Maybe writing it down will help me process everything. We'd been saving up for years to buy our first house, and when we found this old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania for a crazy good price, it felt like hitting the jackpot. The realtor was upfront about it needing some work, but the bones were good and we were ready for a project. Plus, the idea of living somewhere quiet after years in our cramped city apartment was exactly what we wanted. The previous owners had passed away, and their kids just wanted to sell quickly. The house had been empty for about 2 years, but everything was still there. Furniture, decorations, even old family photos on the walls. We planned to clear it out gradually while living there and fixing things up. The first few days were exactly what we expected. Lots of cleaning, figuring out which outlets worked, and making endless lists of repairs. The basement was basically untouched since the 1950s, with old shelving units full of preserves and random junk. We didn't even bother trying to turn on the lights down there since the electrical panel showed the basement circuits had been disconnected years ago. That's why the music was so weird. It started on our 4th night in the house. Emily and I were in bed around 11:30 p.m. when I heard it, this faint, tinny sound coming up through the floor. At first I thought it was coming from outside, maybe a neighbor's house. But when I really listened, it was definitely coming from our basement. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Emily. She was already sitting up in bed, looking confused. "It sounds like old music? Like from the 1920s or something?" We sat there listening to the barely audible melody for a few minutes. It was definitely old-timey music, the kind with lots of brass instruments and that crackly quality you hear on really old recordings. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, and Emily followed me downstairs. The music got clearer as we approached the basement door. My hand was shaking a bit as I turned the handle, not because I was scared exactly, but something about the situation just felt wrong. There shouldn't have been any power down there, let alone music playing. The basement stairs creaked under our feet as we went down. The music was louder now, and I could make out what sounded like a jazz band playing something upbeat. When we reached the bottom, I swept my phone's light around the room, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner, on top of an old table, was a gramophone, one of those antique ones with the big brass horn, and it was playing. I'm not talking about some electronic reproduction or battery-powered thing. This was an actual, mechanical gramophone with a record spinning on it. The arm was down, needle in the groove, horn pointed toward us, music flowing out clear as day. "That's impossible," Emily whispered, gripping my arm. "How is it?" I walked closer, trying to understand what I was seeing. The record was definitely spinning, but there was no obvious power source. These things usually need to be wound up manually to work. As I got within a few feet, I noticed the room had gotten significantly colder. That's when Emily gasped. I turned to look at her and saw her staring past me, her face white as a sheet. I followed her gaze and my blood turned to ice. Standing in the darkest corner of the basement was a figure in what looked like 1920s clothing, a 3-piece suit, complete with a bowler hat. But where their face should have been, there was just shadow, deeper than the darkness around it. The figure wasn't moving, just watching us. I backed away slowly, pulling Emily with me. The figure remained still, but I swear I could feel it following us with whatever passed for its eyes. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and I turned to hurry Emily up them first. That's when she screamed. The figure was now standing at the top of the stairs looking down at us. But that was impossible. We'd been watching it in the corner just seconds ago, and we'd never heard it move. The music from the gramophone suddenly got louder, the jazzy tune becoming distorted and wrong somehow. We were trapped between the figure above and whatever was happening in the basement behind us. Emily was squeezing my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Then the lights came on. Not the actual basement lights. Those were still disconnected. But a soft, yellowish glow began filling the space, seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And in that light, I could see dozens of other figures appearing around us, all in similar old-fashioned clothes, all with those same dark, featureless faces. They were dancing, moving in perfect sync to the now deafening music from the gramophone. I couldn't tell you how we got out of there. My next clear memory is of Emily and me in our car, driving away from the house at 2 a.m. with nothing but the clothes on our backs and our phones. We spent the night in a motel 30 miles away. When we went back the next day, with a police officer we'd convinced to accompany us, everything was normal. The gramophone was covered in dust, clearly untouched for years. The basement was just a basement. The officer probably thought we were crazy or on drugs. We listed the house for sale the next week, took a massive loss on it, but we didn't care. We just wanted out. The weird thing is, when we were packing up our stuff, during daylight hours only, I did some research on the house's history. Turns out it had been a popular spot for underground parties during Prohibition. The basement had been used as a speakeasy. That was 8 months ago. We're in a small apartment now, saving up again. Sometimes I think about checking if anyone else has experienced something similar in that house, but honestly, I'm afraid of what I might find out. The thing that really keeps me up at night, though, every now and then, usually when I'm alone and it's very quiet, I swear I can still hear that music, just on the edge of hearing. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of someone in old-fashioned clothes standing perfectly still, watching me. I know how this all sounds. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I would have thought they were making it up or had watched too many horror movies. But I know what we saw, what we experienced. That gramophone played music without power, and those things were as real as you or me. Maybe whoever buys that house next will never experience anything strange. Maybe we just happened to be there on the wrong night, when whatever barrier exists between then and now was particularly thin. But if you're ever in an old house and hear music playing from somewhere it shouldn't be, don't go looking for the source. Some questions are better left unanswered. I still haven't told my family about what happened. How do you even begin to explain something like this? Emily and I barely talk about it ourselves, but we both know neither of us will ever forget that night. Sometimes I catch her staring into dark corners of our new apartment, and I know she's checking to make sure nothing is standing there, watching us with that featureless face. The most terrifying part? Last week I was cleaning out some boxes we still hadn't unpacked from the move, and I found something that made my heart stop. It was a small brass key with an ornate handle, exactly like the one that used to wind up that gramophone. I know for certain we never touched that gramophone, let alone took anything from it. But somehow, that key found its way into our belongings. I keep it locked in a drawer now. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear it scratching against the wood like it's trying to turn itself. I probably should get rid of it, but something tells me it would find its way back. Some things, once they notice you, never really let you go. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Even typing this makes my hands shake, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened that night at Maple Creek Campground. It was back in September, just 2 months ago. My friends and I had been planning this camping trip for weeks. We're all pretty experienced campers, nothing hardcore, but we've done plenty of weekend trips before. This time it was me, Jake, my roommate, Sarah, Jake's girlfriend, and Mike, my friend from work. We picked Maple Creek because it's about 3 hours from the city and usually pretty quiet this time of year. The day started normal enough. We got to the campsite around 2 p.m., plenty of time to set up before dark. The weather was perfect, that crisp fall temperature where you need a light jacket during the day but can still be comfortable. Our spot was in the back loop of the campground, Site 23, nestled against the tree line. The nearest occupied site had to be at least 500 feet away. Setting up camp was routine. We had 2 tents, one for Jake and Sarah, one for Mike and me. We got the fire pit ready, set up our chairs, hung the bear bag, standard procedure even though we rarely see bears, and organized the coolers. Everything was exactly where it should be. I remember being really particular about how I arranged my hiking boots outside my tent, toes pointing out so I could slip them on quickly if needed. It's just a habit I've always had. As night fell, we did the usual camping stuff, grilled some burgers, had a few beers, nothing crazy since we were planning to hike the next day. Around 9 p.m. we got the fire going really good, and that's when Sarah suggested we tell ghost stories. I know it sounds cliche, but it felt right with the full moon and the way the wind was making the trees creak. Mike went first with some standard campfire story about a hitchhiker. Sarah told one about her cousin's allegedly haunted house. Then Jake shared this story he swore happened to his brother, about weird noises in the woods behind their childhood home. I didn't tell one, because honestly, real life scares me enough. It was probably around 10:30 p.m. when things started feeling wrong. The fire was starting to die down a bit, and we were all getting that tired, mellow feeling you get after a day outdoors. That's when we heard it. Someone started telling Jake's story again, word for word. But the voice, God, the voice. It wasn't coming from our group. It was somewhere behind us, in the darkness beyond our campsite. The voice sounded almost normal, but there was something off about it, like when you hear someone trying to imitate another person, but they can't quite get it right. It had this hollow quality, like it was coming through a long tube. At first, I thought Jake was messing with us, but I could see him clearly across the fire, and his face had gone completely white. Sarah was gripping his arm so tight her knuckles were pale. Mike was frozen mid-sip with his beer can. The voice kept going, perfectly reciting the story about Jake's brother in the woods, including the little nervous laugh Jake had done when he'd mentioned their old dog barking at nothing. It was exactly the same, down to the smallest detail, but wrong. So wrong. I remember thinking I should say something, call out, make noise, anything to break whatever was happening, but my throat felt like it was filled with cotton. None of us moved. None of us spoke. We just sat there listening to this impossible voice tell Jake's story back to us. When the voice finally stopped, the silence felt physical, like a weight pressing down on us. That's when Mike whispered, "We should check the tents." I didn't want to turn on my flashlight. I didn't want to see what might be out there in the dark. But Mike was already standing up, clicking his light on with shaking hands. I followed him, and Jake came too, leaving Sarah by the fire. The moment Mike's light hit the first tent, I felt my stomach drop. Everything was packed. Everything. Both tents were neatly collapsed and folded. Our sleeping bags were rolled tight. All our gear was organized in our backpacks, exactly the way we pack up to leave. Even my boots, which I distinctly remember leaving outside my tent, were cleaned and tucked into their spot on my pack. "This isn't possible," Jake kept saying over and over. "This isn't possible." We heard Sarah scream then. Not a horror movie scream, more like a choked gasp. When we spun around, she was standing up, pointing at something beyond the fire's light. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps were circling our campsite. The sound was clear, leaves crunching, twigs snapping, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible anyway. The footsteps moved slowly, methodically, completing a circle around us. Then another, and another. We could track the sound as it moved, but our light showed nothing but empty forest. The beam would hit a spot where we'd just heard a step, and there'd be a fresh print in the dirt or a crushed leaf, but nothing making it. I noticed the temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath now, even near the fire. The footsteps kept circling, and with each pass they got a little closer to our group. Mike suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed at the ground. The prints were changing. At first they looked like regular boot prints, but now they were getting longer, deeper. The last one I saw clearly looked more like a giant paw print than anything human. That's when the voice came back. But this time it wasn't telling Jake's story. It started telling a new story about four friends at a campsite describing exactly what we were doing at that moment, describing how scared we were, describing what it was going to do to us. I'd like to say we were brave, that we stood our ground or tried to fight whatever it was. But the truth is, we ran. We just ran. Left everything behind, the tents, the gear, all of it. We made it to Mike's SUV, piled in, and drove straight out of there. Nobody spoke for the first hour. We called the rangers the next day. They found our campsite exactly as we'd left it, except all our gear was gone. Not stolen, not scattered by animals, just gone, like we'd never been there at all. I still have nightmares about that voice, about the way it told our story before it happened. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think I hear footsteps circling my house. Jake and Sarah moved in with her parents for a while. Mike took a job in another state. None of us go camping anymore. The thing that really keeps me up at night, though, that new story it started telling, about what it was going to do to us, it never finished it. Sometimes I wonder if that's because the story isn't over yet. I know how this all sounds. Trust me, I know. If someone had told me this story 2 months ago, I would have thought they were making it up or had too much to drink around the campfire. But I can't explain what happened that night. I can't explain how our campsite was packed up in minutes without any of us seeing or hearing it happen. I can't explain those footprints or that voice. I've spent countless hours researching similar experiences, looking into the history of Maple Creek, trying to find any explanation that makes sense. The closest I've come is a few vague forum posts about other campers hearing strange voices in that area, but nothing like what we experienced. Maybe I'm sharing this as a warning. Maybe I'm just hoping someone out there can tell me I'm not losing my mind. All I know is that something impossible happened that night, and I haven't felt safe in the dark since. To anyone planning a camping trip to Maple Creek, don't. And if you're ever sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories, and you hear one of them being told back to you, run. Don't pack up, don't check your tent, don't try to figure out what's happening. Just run. I haven't been back to those woods, and I never will be. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I swear I can hear that voice starting to tell our story again. And every time, I wonder if this time, it's going to tell me how it ends. I keep having nightmares about that night, and maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. I still can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. Last October, my friends and I decided to do a weekend hiking trip in the Adirondacks. It was me, Sarah, my roommate from college, her boyfriend Mike, and our mutual friend Jason. We'd done plenty of hikes together before, but this time we wanted to try a more remote trail that would take us deeper into the wilderness. Everything was going fine until around 4 p.m. when the weather suddenly turned. The temperature dropped dramatically, and this thick fog started rolling in out of nowhere. We could barely see 20 feet ahead of us, and the trail markers became harder to spot. I remember checking my phone's GPS, but for some reason, it kept showing us in slightly different locations each time I refreshed it. That's when Mike spotted the cabin through the fog. None of us had seen it marked on any of the trail maps, but at that point we were just relieved to find shelter. It was getting dark way too fast, and the fog was only getting thicker. The cabin looked old, but solid, probably an old ranger station or hunting cabin that had been abandoned years ago. I remember having this weird feeling in my gut as we approached it. You know that sensation when you're alone somewhere, but you feel like you're being watched? It was like that, but 10 times stronger. Sarah must have felt it too because she hesitated at the door, but the temperature was dropping fast and we didn't have much choice. The inside of the cabin was basic but decent enough. One main room with some old furniture, a small kitchen area, and 2 small bedrooms. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there was no sign of animals or serious damage. We found some old oil lamps that still had fuel in them, which seemed lucky at the time. God, I wish we'd just kept walking. We set up our sleeping bags in the main room, started a fire in the old wood stove, and tried to make the best of it. Around 8 p.m., that's when the tapping started. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining it. Just a light tap, tap, tap on the window, like someone gently drumming their fingers. We all heard it, but when Jason checked outside with his flashlight, there was nothing there. Not even branches near enough to hit the glass. The tapping would stop for maybe 30 minutes, then start again on a different window. Sometimes it was faster, sometimes slower, but it always had this deliberate feel to it, like it was trying to get our attention. We tried to laugh it off, blame it on the wind or animals, but deep down, we all knew it wasn't natural. Around midnight, Sarah started acting strange. She'd been quiet for a while, just staring at the corner of the room. When I asked if she was okay, she smiled in this weird way I'd never seen before and said, "They just want to talk to us." Her voice sounded different, almost childlike. Mike tried to get her attention, but it was like she couldn't hear him. She kept having these whispered conversations with empty space, nodding and sometimes giggling quietly. When we tried to touch her or get her to look at us, she'd just gently push our hands away, like we were the ones not making sense. The tapping got louder after that, and it wasn't just on the windows anymore. It was on the walls, the door, even the ceiling. But it was what we heard between the taps that really terrified me. Whispers. Dozens of overlapping whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. They were too quiet to make out words, but they sounded hungry. Jason suggested we leave right then, but when we tried to open the door, the handle was ice cold. So cold it burned to touch. The windows wouldn't budge either. We were trapped inside with whatever was trying to get our attention. I must have dozed off eventually, despite everything. I remember checking my phone at 3:17 a.m. and Mike was sitting up watching Sarah, who was still whispering to her invisible friends. Jason had finally fallen asleep in his sleeping bag near the wood stove. When I woke up again at 5:43 a.m., the tapping had stopped. The first light of dawn was just starting to show through the windows. Sarah was asleep, curled up against the wall, looking normal again. But Jason's sleeping bag was empty. We searched every inch of that cabin. His boots were still by the door. His phone and backpack were right where he'd left them. The door was still locked from the inside, and none of the windows showed any signs of being opened. He'd just vanished. The police searched for weeks. They brought in dogs, helicopters, professional search and rescue teams. They found nothing. No tracks leading away from the cabin. No signs of struggle. No blood. Nothing. They even looked into the history of the cabin, but they couldn't find any records of who built it or when. Sarah doesn't remember anything about her conversations that night. The last thing she clearly remembers is eating dinner. When we try to talk about what happened, she gets these horrible headaches and her nose starts bleeding. It's been 8 months and I still wake up sometimes hearing that tapping. Sarah says she does too. Mike won't go hiking anymore. Jason's family is still searching, but I know they won't find anything. Whatever was in that cabin took him somewhere we can't follow. The weirdest part? When the police finally took us back to identify the cabin and show them exactly where it was, we couldn't find it. We spent hours searching the area where we knew it had to be, but there was nothing there. No foundation, no clearing, not even a single rotted board. It was like the cabin had never existed at all. I know how this sounds. If someone told me this story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed them. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just a nightmare. But then I'll catch a glimpse of Sarah staring into empty corners again. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night to that familiar tap, tap, tap on my bedroom window, and I know it was real. Jason's still out there somewhere. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear him whispering. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night 6 months ago. My girlfriend Emma and I were driving back from visiting her parents in Vermont, making the long trek down to Philadelphia. It was around 2 a.m., and we'd been on the road for hours. The highway was practically empty, just endless darkness broken up by our headlights and the occasional truck passing by. I was getting pretty drowsy, and Emma had been complaining about her legs cramping up from sitting so long. When we saw the sign for a rest stop coming up in 2 miles, it felt like perfect timing. I remember checking the fuel gauge. We still had half a tank, but I figured we could both use a quick break to stretch and maybe grab some coffee from the vending machines if they had any. The rest stop was one of those older ones, not the fancy modern places with fast food joints and mini-marts. Just a simple brick building set back from the highway, with separate entrances for men's and women's restrooms. The parking lot was completely empty when we pulled in, which wasn't too surprising given the hour. What did strike me as odd was that none of the exterior lights were on. Just a single flickering bulb above the main entrance casting weird shadows across the building's facade. Emma grabbed her phone to use as a flashlight, and I did the same. The temperature had dropped significantly since sunset, and our breath came out in visible puffs as we walked toward the building. The concrete was wet from earlier rain, and our footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. When we reached the main entrance, I pulled on the handle, but it was locked. Same with the side entrance to the men's room. "That's weird," I remember saying. "These places are usually open 24/7. Emma tried the women's room door too, also locked. We were about to head back to the car when we heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it became clearer. Whispers coming from inside the building. Soft, but distinct, and they were saying our names. James, Emma. I felt my whole body go cold. We hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes on the highway. There was no way anyone could know who we were. Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "James, why don't you come in?" "Emma, we've been waiting." The voices seemed to be coming from the bathroom stalls inside. Multiple voices, all whispering in this weird, sing-song way that made my skin crawl. What made it even more terrifying was how they seemed to echo and overlap, like a disturbing chorus. Emma's phone flashlight beam caught something moving behind one of the windows, just a quick shadow darting past, but it was enough to send us both running back to the car. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them before managing to unlock the doors. As soon as we got in, I locked all the doors and started the engine. The headlights came on automatically, illuminating the front of the building. For a split second, I swear I saw multiple dark figures pressed against the windows, but when I blinked, they were gone. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the parking spot as fast as I safely could. Emma was watching the building through the passenger window, her face pale. "James," she said, her voice shaking. "Look at our shadows." I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt my heart nearly stop. Our shadows on the back wall of the rest stop weren't moving with us. They were standing completely still, waving slowly even though we were now in the car. As I accelerated toward the highway entrance, the shadows seemed to peel themselves off the wall and start walking toward us. I hit the gas hard, tires squealing as we merged back onto the highway. Emma was watching behind us, and I kept checking the rearview mirror. The rest stop quickly disappeared into the darkness, but something felt wrong. There was this heavy feeling in the car, like the air had gotten thicker. "Do you feel that?" Emma whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The interior lights were off, but there was enough ambient light from the dashboard that we should have been able to see the empty back seat in the rearview mirror. Instead, there was just this deep, unnatural darkness. Then I saw it. Movement in that darkness. A shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, shifting and rippling like smoke. It seemed to be taking shape, forming into something vaguely human-shaped. Emma saw it too and let out a strangled gasp. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, pushing the car well beyond the speed limit. The shadow in the back seat started to reach forward, these long, dark tendrils extending toward us. The air got even heavier, and this overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I could barely breathe. Emma started frantically turning on all the interior lights, and that's when things got even stranger. Every time she hit a light switch, the shadow would recoil slightly, but our own shadows wouldn't appear anywhere in the car. It was like they had been stolen from us, left behind at that rest stop. We drove like that for almost an hour, too terrified to stop, watching that thing in the back seat gradually grow more solid. The whispers started again. but they were different now. Deeper, more distorted, like they were coming from underwater. They were saying things I couldn't quite make out, but just hearing them made me feel sick to my stomach. Finally, around 3:30 a.m., the first light of dawn started appearing on the horizon. As the sky began lightening, the shadow in our back seat started to fade. The whispers grew fainter and that oppressive feeling slowly lifted. By the time the sun actually started rising, everything seemed normal. Our shadows were back where they should be, and the back seat was empty. We didn't stop driving until we reached Philadelphia, and we didn't talk much about what happened. What could we say? It sounds completely insane even now. I've looked up that rest stop since then, tried to find any history or similar stories, but I've found nothing concrete. The building shows up on maps, but there's barely any information about it online. The weirdest part? Emma and I drove back up to Vermont about a month ago, taking the same route. We passed where the rest stop should have been, but it wasn't there. Just empty woods on both sides of the highway. The exit sign was gone too, like it had never existed. Sometimes late at night, I still catch glimpses of strange shadows in my peripheral vision. And sometimes when it's very quiet, I think I can hear those whispers calling my name. Emma says the same thing happens to her. We've both noticed that our shadows sometimes seem to move a fraction of a second too slowly, like they're reluctant to follow us. I don't know what we encountered that night, and part of me doesn't want to know. But I can tell you this. I never stop at rest areas after dark anymore, and if I'm ever driving at night and see a single flickering light in the distance, I keep going, no matter how tired I am or how badly I need a break. I know this all sounds completely crazy. Trust me, I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize it, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion or some kind of shared hallucination. But deep down, I know what we experienced was real. Something was waiting for us at that rest stop, something that knew our names and wanted. I don't know what it wanted, and that might be the scariest part of all. These days I try to live normally, but things are different. Every shadow makes me pause. Every whisper makes me look over my shoulder. And every time I look in my rearview mirror at night, there's this moment of dread before I can convince myself that the darkness in the back seat is just ordinary darkness. Whatever was in that rest stop, whatever followed us home in our shadows, I think it's still out there. And sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if maybe it never really left us at all. I've been trying to make sense of what happened that night for the past 3 months. My hands are shaking even as I type this, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me understand what we encountered. It happened back in August when my buddy Mike and I were heading back from a concert in Bedford County. It was around 11 p.m., and we were taking the back roads to avoid the highway construction. Mike was driving, and I was half asleep in the passenger seat when his GPS started acting up. The screen kept freezing, and then it just died completely. "No big deal," Mike said. "I know a shortcut through the old Miller property. It'll save us like 20 minutes. I should mention that I'd grown up in the area, and everyone knew about Miller's farm. There were always rumors about it being haunted after the Miller family disappeared in the 70s, but I'd always brushed them off as small-town gossip. The property had been abandoned for decades, and local teens would sometimes dare each other to spend the night there. I'd never gone myself. Something about the place just felt wrong. The moment we turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm, the temperature in the car dropped. I'm not talking about a slight chill. It was like someone had suddenly opened a freezer door right in our faces. Mike noticed it too because he started fiddling with the heater controls, but nothing was coming out. As we drove past the main farmhouse, I could see it was in even worse shape than I remembered. The white paint was almost completely gone, the windows were mostly broken, and the porch had partially collapsed. But the barn, the massive red barn that stood about 50 yards from the house, looked different. In the moonlight, it almost seemed preserved, like time hadn't touched it the same way it had the house. That's when we heard it. A child's laugh, clear as day, cutting through the silence like a knife. Mike slammed on the brakes and we both sat there frozen. The laugh came again, this time from the direction of the barn. "Did you?" Mike started to ask, but I was already nodding. We both heard it. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't our imagination, and it definitely wasn't an animal. It was the pure, innocent laugh of a young child. I know what you're thinking. We should have gotten out of there immediately. And you're right. But there was something about that laugh that made us both think the same thing. What if there really was a kid out there? What if someone was in trouble? Mike pulled the car over and cut the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there for a moment, just listening. The moonlight was bright enough that we could see pretty clearly, and there wasn't anyone visible around the barn. "We should check," Mike said, and I reluctantly agreed. We both got out of the car, and the moment my feet hit the ground, I felt wrong. The air was thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. The grass beneath our feet was crisp with frost, which made no sense because it was August in Pennsylvania, and the temperature had been in the high 70s all day. We walked toward the barn, our phone's flashlights cutting through the darkness. The beam from my phone kept flickering, though the battery was at 98%. Mike's was doing the same thing. The closer we got to the barn, the more intense the cold became. I could see my breath in front of my face, forming thick clouds that hung in the air longer than they should have. There was a window on the side of the barn about chest height. Most of the glass was gone, but a few jagged pieces remained around the edges. We approached it slowly, and I noticed something strange. There was light coming from inside. Not electric light, but a soft, yellowish glow, like from old oil lamps. I reached the window first and peered inside. For a split second, everything seemed normal. Just an old barn interior with some rusted farm equipment. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw them. There was a family inside, a man, a woman, and 3 children. They were dressed in clothes that looked like they were from the 70s, and they were all perfectly still like a photograph. But they weren't just standing there. They were frozen in the middle of what looked like a family dinner. There was a table set up in the middle of the barn with plates of food that looked fresh and steaming. The woman was in the middle of pouring something from a pitcher, the liquid suspended in midair. The youngest child had a fork halfway to his mouth. The older children were reaching for bread rolls. The father was cutting into what looked like a roast. But their faces, God, their faces. They were all staring directly at us, their eyes wide and completely blank, like dolls' eyes. Their expressions were frozen in these horrible, unnatural smiles that stretched too wide across their faces. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there staring at this impossible scene, trying to make my brain process what I was seeing. Then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. It was ice cold, the kind of cold that burns. I could feel each individual finger pressing into my flesh through my t-shirt. Mike was standing to my right, also staring through the window. Both of his hands were gripping the windowsill. I slowly turned my head to look behind me, but there was nothing there. The pressure on my shoulder remained, and I could feel the fingers starting to dig in deeper. I tried to speak, to warn Mike, but my voice wouldn't work. The cold was spreading from where the hand gripped me, moving down my arm and across my chest. Inside the barn, the family was still frozen, still staring, but something had changed. Blood had started to drip from their noses, dark and thick, running down over those terrible smiles. The youngest child's head began to tilt, slowly, mechanically, like a wind-up toy. The movement was wrong. It went too far, turning almost completely sideways. Mike must have seen it too, because he suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the window. The invisible hand released its grip and we both ran back to the car. I've never run so fast in my life. My legs felt like they were moving through molasses, and the distance to the car seemed to stretch out impossibly long. We finally reached the car, and Mike fumbled with the keys. Just as he got the door open, we heard the laugh again. But this time it wasn't a child's laugh. It was deep and distorted, like someone trying to imitate a child's laugh through a broken speaker. It came from right behind us. We jumped in the car and Mike turned the key. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. The laugh was getting closer. Mike tried again, and this time the engine roared to life. He slammed it into reverse and hit the gas so hard that gravel sprayed everywhere. As we were backing up, I looked in the side mirror. In the fading glow of the taillights, I saw them, the family from the barn standing in the middle of the road. They were still frozen in their dinner poses, the mother's pitcher still pouring nothing into the air, but they were there, outside, staring at us with those blank eyes and bloody smiles. Mike spun the car around, and we tore out of there like hell itself was chasing us. Neither of us spoke for the next 20 minutes. The heater suddenly started working again, and my phone stopped flickering. It was like crossing some invisible boundary that separated that place from the normal world. We tried to go back the next day in broad daylight. We even brought a few other friends with us, but we couldn't find the turnoff to the dirt road. We drove up and down that stretch of highway multiple times, but it was like the road to Miller's farm had simply vanished. I still have a perfect handprint-shaped bruise on my shoulder. It hasn't faded at all in 3 months. Sometimes it gets ice cold for no reason, and I swear I can feel those fingers pressing into my skin again. Mike won't talk about what happened anymore. He changed his route to work to avoid driving anywhere near that area. I've spent countless hours researching the Miller family since then. All I could find were some old newspaper articles about their disappearance in 1974. They were last seen having dinner in their barn because their house was being fumigated. The police found the table still set with a full dinner, the food still warm, but the family was gone. No bodies were ever found. I don't know what we encountered that night. I don't know if we somehow stumbled into some kind of time loop, or if what we saw were ghosts, or something else entirely. All I know is that somewhere out there, on a road that only appears at night, there's a barn where a family is eternally frozen in their last moment together, waiting for someone else to stumble upon their endless dinner. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear that laugh. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years now, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I still get chills thinking about that night, and I haven't driven that stretch of I-40 since then. I know this might sound crazy, but I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks. It was about 3 weeks ago, and I was making my regular run from Albuquerque to Oklahoma City. I'd done this route hundreds of times before, usually overnight because the traffic's better. The weather that night was weird, not stormy or anything, just this heavy stillness in the air that made me uneasy. You know that feeling when the air pressure changes before a big storm? It was like that, but no storm ever came. Around midnight, my fuel gauge was getting low. I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour, which wasn't too unusual for that time of night, but something felt off. The darkness seemed thicker than usual, like it was pressing against my windshield. I was starting to get that fuzzy feeling you get when you've been driving too long, so I was relieved when I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. It was one of those old-school stations, not part of any major chain. Just a couple of pumps under a rusty awning and a small convenience store with flickering fluorescent lights. The price sign was ancient, with half the numbers missing. I didn't care about the prices, though. I just needed fuel and maybe some coffee. I pulled up to the pump, and that's when I noticed something weird in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me from being tired. There was this dark figure standing by the edge of the light from the station's overhead lamps. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, and it seemed slightly closer. I blamed it on fatigue and got out to pump the gas. The night air was dead silent. You know how there's usually at least some ambient noise? Crickets, distant traffic, something? There was nothing, just the click of the pump handle and my own breathing. I kept glancing around while the tank filled, but I didn't see the figure anymore. Still, my skin was crawling. The hair on the back of my neck wouldn't settle down. I went inside to pay and grab some coffee. The store was empty except for the clerk, an old guy who looked like he'd been there since the station was built. He barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when I walked in. The fluorescent lights were making this soft buzzing sound that seemed to drill right into my skull. While I was fixing my coffee, it was definitely old and burnt, but I needed the caffeine. I glanced out the window at my truck. That's when I saw it again. The figure, definitely closer now, standing right at the edge of my truck's shadow. I blinked hard and it was gone. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled some coffee on the counter. The clerk finally looked up when I brought my stuff to register. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had this weird, distant look. "You heading east?" he asked, his voice raspy like he hadn't used it in hours. "Yeah, on I-40, I replied, trying to sound casual while fumbling with my wallet. He just stared at me for a few seconds too long before saying, "Be careful out there. Roads get weird at night sometimes." Then he went back to his crossword like our interaction never happened. I practically ran back to my truck. The silence outside felt even heavier now, like it was physically pressing against my eardrums. I locked the doors as soon as I got in, something I rarely do, and started the engine. The headlights seemed dimmer than usual, barely cutting through the darkness ahead. That's when I made the mistake of checking my rear-view mirror again. The figure was right there at the back of my trailer, and I swear to God it was closer than before. I couldn't make out any features. It was just this black silhouette that seemed to absorb what little light there was around it. I threw the truck into gear and got out of there as fast as I could. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I kept checking the mirrors, but I didn't see the figure anymore. After a few minutes, I started to calm down a bit, telling myself I was just tired and letting my imagination run wild. But something still felt wrong. The road didn't feel right under my wheels. You know how after you've driven the same road hundreds of times you get a feel for it? The curves, the slight changes in elevation, the rhythm of the road. This felt different, and I noticed there weren't any mile markers anymore. I checked my GPS, but the screen was just showing static. My phone had no signal either. The radio was picking up nothing but static too, no matter what frequency I tried. I figured I must have somehow gotten onto a different road, but I couldn't remember making any turns. That's when I glanced up at my rearview mirror again, and my blood turned to ice. The figure was in my cab, sitting in the passenger seat. Just this black void in the shape of a person. I almost ran off the road right there. And then it spoke. Its voice was like gravel being crushed, barely above a whisper. "You're on the wrong road." I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My whole body was cold, and I could feel sweat running down my back. The figure didn't move, didn't turn towards me, just sat there. "This road doesn't go anywhere you want to be," it whispered again. I managed to choke out, "What do you want?" No response, just silence. When I looked again, the passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely put the truck in park. According to my odometer, I'd driven almost 200 miles since leaving the gas station, but that was impossible. It had only been about 30 minutes. I got out of the truck with my flashlight, needing to see where the hell I was. The road stretched out in both directions, but something was really wrong with it. The asphalt looked too black, too new. There were no road markings, no reflectors, nothing. And the landscape around it. I've driven through some empty places before, but this was different. It was like the road was cutting through absolute nothingness. My flashlight beam just seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness after about 20 feet. And the silence, it was complete, absolute. Like being in a vacuum. I couldn't even hear the usual tick of my truck's engine cooling down. I was trying to figure out what to do when I heard that gravelly whisper again, right behind me. "Turn around. While you still can." I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. I jumped back in my truck and started driving back the way I came. I don't know how long I drove. My watch had stopped working, and the sky never changed. It was just endless darkness. Then suddenly I was back on I-40. Just like that. Normal traffic, normal road signs, normal everything. My GPS snapped back to life, showing me right where I should be on my regular route. My phone started buzzing with missed notifications. According to the time, only about an hour had passed since I'd stopped for gas. I pulled into the next rest stop and sat there until sunrise. too scared to keep driving. When it was light out, I tried to find that gas station. I drove back and forth along that stretch of highway 3 times, but it wasn't there. I even checked Google Maps. Nothing. That was 3 weeks ago. I've gone back to work, still doing the same route, but only during daylight hours now. I've tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. But I know I didn't. The worst part? Sometimes when I'm driving and I check my mirror just for a split second, I think I see that figure standing on the side of the road. And every time I pass an unmarked exit at night, I can't help but wonder if it leads to that wrong road. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept driving on that impossible road. I don't want to know. But I keep thinking about what the gas station clerk said about roads getting weird at night. I wonder how many other drivers have found themselves on roads that shouldn't exist and how many of them made it back. These days I keep a thermos of coffee with me and never let my tank get below half full. And I never, ever look in my rearview mirror more than I absolutely have to. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last month while camping in my van. I've been doing the van life thing for about 8 months now. Nothing fancy, just me and my converted 2012 Sprinter trying to save money and see some nature. I'd done plenty of solo camping before, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night in the Ozarks. I'd found this really secluded spot about 15 miles down an old Forest Service road, way off the main highway. The kind of place you go when you really want to disconnect. No cell service, no other campers, just trees and silence. In hindsight, maybe that should have been my first warning sign. I'd spent the day hiking and taking photos of the fall colors. The weather was perfect, crisp but not cold, with that clean autumn smell in the air. I remember feeling so peaceful as I made dinner on my little camp stove, watching the sunset through the trees. I even took a few pictures of my van life dinner. Just some ramen with veggies, nothing Instagram-worthy, before settling in with my Kindle. Around 11 p.m., I did my usual nighttime routine, locked all the doors, closed the blackout curtains I'd installed, and got into my sleeping bag. I always keep my hiking boots and a flashlight right by the bed, just in case. The van was parked facing downhill on a slight slope, which I usually do to help with leveling while I sleep. I must have dozed off pretty quickly because the next thing I remember is jolting awake to a weird scratching sound. At first, I thought it might be a branch scraping against the van. It was a bit windy that night, but then I heard it again, and this time I knew it wasn't a branch. It was deliberate, methodical, like someone was running their fingernails along the side of my van, moving from the back towards the front. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I lay there completely still, straining to listen. The scratching stopped near the driver's side door. Then came the sound that still haunts me, the distinct metallic click of someone trying my door handle. Once, twice, 3 times. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I knew my doors were locked, but suddenly the van felt paper thin. I could sense someone standing right outside, probably inches from where I was lying. Then they started moving around to the passenger side, testing that door handle too. The worst part was knowing they knew I was inside. My curtains were closed, but earlier I'd had my lights on, and I'd been moving around cooking dinner. Anyone watching would have seen me. I was alone out here, and someone had specifically targeted my van. I reached for my phone even though I knew it was useless. No signal. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I had bear spray and a knife in the center console, but getting to them meant making noise. So I just lay there barely breathing as this person circled my van over and over. Sometimes they'd stop for several minutes, and I'd think maybe they'd gone. Then the scratching would start again, or I'd hear footsteps crunching in the leaves. This went on for what felt like hours. I kept checking my phone, 1:47 a.m., 2:23 a.m., 3:05 a.m. At some point, I heard a weird rhythmic squeaking sound that I couldn't identify. It was fairly quick and repeated several times, then stopped. Later, I would realize what that sound was, and it makes my blood run cold thinking about it. Around 4 a.m., everything went quiet. Real quiet. Even the wind had died down. I lay there for another hour, terrified to move, before I finally started to see the first gray light of dawn through a tiny gap in my curtains. I waited until it was fully light out before I finally worked up the courage to look outside. What I saw made my legs go weak. All 4 of my tires were completely flat, methodically slashed. Not just punctured. Whoever did this had taken their time, cutting huge gashes in each sidewall. That squeaking sound I'd heard. That was the air slowly leaking out while I lay there helpless. But that wasn't even the worst part. All around my van in the soft dirt and fallen leaves were footprints. Not from walking around randomly. They formed a perfect circle around my vehicle, like someone had paced around and around all night. The prints were so numerous in some places they had worn a visible track in the ground. I was stranded. My van was undrivable, I had no cell service, and I was at least 15 miles from the main road. And somewhere out there, someone had spent hours trying to get to me and might still be watching. I grabbed my emergency pack, the bear spray, knife, and all the water I could carry. As I was shoving things into my backpack, my hands trembling, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. A small piece of paper had been tucked under my windshield wiper. On it, in messy handwriting, were just 3 words. Should have stayed awake. I started hiking out immediately, practically running down that Forest Service road. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like a person. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see someone following me. The scariest thing is that I never saw anyone. Not that night, not during my terrifying 3-hour hike out to the main road, where I finally got cell service and called for help. The police came out but found nothing except what I'd already seen: the slashed tires, the footprints, that note. No fingerprints, no evidence of who did it or why. I had to get my van towed all the way back to town and replace all 4 tires. It cost me nearly $1,000, but that's not what bothers me. What keeps me up at night is thinking about how long they watched me before making their move. Were they following me before I even turned down that Forest Service road? Had they been stalking other campers too? The cop who took my report said they'd had a few similar incidents in those woods over the past year. Lone campers being harassed, but never anything physical. Always just psychological torture. Always just letting people know they weren't as alone as they thought they were. I sold my van last week. I couldn't sleep in it anymore. Couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes when it's late at night and I'm lying in bed, I swear I can hear that scratching sound again. Fingernails on metal, moving closer and closer. I still have that note. I don't know why I kept it. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, trying to understand what kind of person would do something like this. But mostly I just think about how differently things could have gone if I'd woken up to the sound of my doors being tried and found they weren't locked after all. The worst part is not knowing why. Was I just randomly chosen? Was I being followed? Did I do something to attract their attention? I'll never know. But I do know one thing. I'm never camping alone again. There are things out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. And sometimes they decide to let you know they're there, just to remind you how vulnerable you really are. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 8 months now, and I still get cold sweats thinking about what happened that weekend. I guess I finally need to write this down, if only to convince myself that it was real, and not some twisted nightmare my mind made up. I found the retreat through a Facebook ad of all things. I know how that sounds. Who actually clicks on those? But after my divorce and losing my job at the tech startup I helped build, I was desperately searching for something, anything, to help me make sense of my life. The ad showed these peaceful images of people meditating in beautiful forest settings, promised life-changing spiritual awakening, and ancient wisdom traditions. Yeah, I know how naive that sounds now. The retreat was called Forest Temple, Journey to Inner Truth, and was supposedly run by this guy who went by Brother Michael. The website looked professional enough. Lots of testimonials from supposed past participants talking about how it changed their lives, found their purpose, all that stuff. $2,800 for a 3-day intensive retreat seemed steep, but I had some savings, and honestly, I would have paid anything at that point to stop feeling so lost. There were only 12 spots available, and I grabbed one of the last ones for the late September session. The location was somewhere in the Willamette National Forest in Oregon, about 3 hours east of Portland. They sent detailed instructions about what to bring, minimal clothing, no electronics, and what to expect. Mostly vague spiritual buzzwords about opening your consciousness and accessing higher planes of awareness. I should have noticed the red flags. The fact that they wouldn't give us the exact location until 2 days before. The weird liability waiver that went way beyond the usual, you might trip on a rock stuff. The emphasis on surrendering to the experience and leaving your old self behind. But I was too caught up in the promise of it all. The morning of the retreat, I followed their directions down these increasingly remote Forest Service roads. My cell signal had died about 30 minutes back when I finally saw their sign. Just a simple wooden arrow with FT carved into it. The parking area was just a cleared patch of dirt where 5 or 6 other cars were already parked. A guy in his early 20s wearing all white was waiting there. He introduced himself as Sky, obviously not his real name, and said he'd take us the rest of the way on foot. There were 11 of us total, mostly professional-looking people in their 30s and 40s, the kind you'd expect to see at a pricey spiritual retreat. Everyone seemed a little nervous but excited. We hiked for about 45 minutes through dense forest. The trail wasn't really a trail, more like a rough path through the trees. Sky kept talking about how we were leaving the material world behind with each step. Finally, we came to a clearing with several large canvas platform tents arranged in a circle around a central fire pit area. It looked like something between glamping and a low-budget cult compound. Brother Michael was waiting for us. He was maybe in his 50s, tall and thin with this intense presence about him. He had this way of looking at you like he could see right through you. He gave this whole welcome speech about how we were chosen to be there, how this wasn't just another retreat but a gateway to ancient mysteries. Looking back, it should have sounded like cheesy New Age nonsense, but something about the way he spoke made it feel real and important. The first day was pretty standard retreat stuff. Meditation, breathing exercises, sharing circles where everyone talked about their pain and what brought them there. Brother Michael was good, I'll give him that. He knew exactly what to say to make everyone feel seen and understood. He kept emphasizing how special this group was, how we were ready for deeper work than most. The weird stuff started that evening. They served us this tea that tasted bitter and medicinal. Brother Michael said it was an ancient purification blend to prepare us for the next day's ceremony. Within an hour, everyone was feeling off. Not high exactly, but disconnected. Words started feeling strange in my mouth. Time seemed to stretch and compress randomly. I remember looking at my watch at one point and being unable to understand what the numbers meant. I've never been big on drugs or altered states, so this really freaked me out. I pretended to sleep, but actually spent most of the night watching the others. Some were having intense visions, talking to themselves, waving their hands at invisible things. The staff members just watched, taking notes. That's when I decided to be extra careful about anything they gave us to consume. The next morning, everyone was groggy but excited. Brother Michael announced that we were ready for the core ceremony, what we'd all supposedly come for. They gave us these white robes to wear and led us to another clearing deeper in the forest. There was this crude stone altar set up, covered in weird symbols I didn't recognize. Not like any religious or spiritual symbols I'd ever seen. They looked wrong somehow. Brother Michael stood behind the altar wearing this elaborate robe covered in the same symbols. He had this chalice made of some dark metal. He said the liquid inside was the essence of truth passed down through an ancient lineage of spiritual masters. Everyone would drink, and our true selves would be revealed. I had a really bad feeling about all of it. When it was my turn, I pretended to drink but actually let it run down the side of my mouth. Thank God I did. Within minutes, the others started changing. Not physically, but their expressions, their movements, everything became wrong. They were still conscious, still moving and speaking, but it wasn't them anymore. Their eyes were empty, like there was nothing behind them. Brother Michael's whole demeanor changed too. The wise spiritual teacher act dropped away completely. He started giving instructions in this language I'd never heard before, harsh and guttural, and the others responded to it. They moved in perfect unison, like puppets. A few of the staff members brought out these black candles and set them up in some kind of pattern. I tried to keep acting like I was under the influence too, copying the others' movements. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Brother Michael started this chant that made my skin crawl. The air felt thick and wrong, like reality itself was warping. The others started making these horrible sounds, not quite screaming, not quite singing. That's when I noticed the shadows around us were moving wrong. They were deepening, spreading. Even though the sun hadn't set yet, they seemed to be gathering around Brother Michael. He had his arms raised and was speaking faster and faster in that awful language. The shadows started taking shape. Nothing solid, nothing I could clearly see, but something was forming there that should not exist in our world. I knew I had to get out of there. The staff members were all focused on the ceremony, and in the growing darkness I managed to back away slowly until I reached the tree line. Then I ran. I ran like I've never run before, crashing through the forest with no idea where I was going. I could hear that chanting echoing through the trees and other sounds that I can't even describe. Sounds that human throats shouldn't be able to make. Somehow, I found my way back to the parking area. I hadn't grabbed any of my stuff, just bolted in that white robe they'd given us. I drove out of there like a maniac, not stopping until I reached the first town with cell service. I called the police, but of course by the time they checked it out, the whole area was deserted. No tents, no altar, no evidence anyone had been there at all. I've spent months trying to track down the others who were there. The website disappeared. All social media accounts associated with the retreat were deleted. I found one news article about a missing person, one of the other participants, but their family said they'd gone hiking alone in California. Sometimes I think maybe I imagined it all. But then I'll catch a glimpse of my reflection and for a split second I'll see something in the shadows behind me. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night hearing that chanting. And I know it was real. I know something horrible happened in those woods, and I'm probably the only one who got away. I still have questions that haunt me. What was really in that chalice? What happened to the others? What was Brother Michael trying to summon in those shadows? But maybe those are questions I don't want answered. Maybe I'm better off not knowing. All I know is that I'll never set foot in another spiritual retreat, and I'll never drink anything a stranger gives me, no matter how trustworthy they seem. If you're reading this and thinking about going to some remote retreat that promises enlightenment or spiritual awakening, please be careful. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some truths aren't meant to be found. And some people who claim to be spiritual guides are leading their followers somewhere much darker than anyone could imagine. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last month at that motel in Nevada. I've been trying to process it ever since, and I finally feel ready to write it all down. Maybe putting it into words will help make sense of it, though honestly, I doubt anything ever will. I was driving from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles for a job interview. Money was tight, so I was trying to do the whole trip as cheaply as possible. Around 9 p.m., after about 8 hours of driving through endless desert, I was getting really tired. The kind of tired where your eyes start playing tricks on you and you catch yourself drifting. I knew I needed to stop, but I was in the middle of nowhere on Route 375, literally called the extraterrestrial highway because it's so empty and desolate. That's when I saw the sign for the Desert Palm Motel, promising rooms for $45 a night. The sign was old and faded, but it had one of those vacancy lights still glowing. I hadn't passed anything else for miles, and my phone was showing no service, so I decided to pull in. The parking lot was basically just packed dirt with a few sad-looking palm trees. There were only 2 other cars there, an old pickup truck and what looked like a 90s Corolla covered in dust. The office was this tiny building with flickering fluorescent lights. As soon as I walked in, this overwhelming smell of cheap air freshener hit me. You know, those pine tree ones people hang in cars? Like that, but way too strong. Behind the desk was this guy, probably in his 50s, wearing a Hawaiian shirt that had seen better days. He smiled way too wide when I walked in, like he'd been waiting just for me. "Welcome, welcome," he practically shouted, even though it was late at night. "Just you tonight? Perfect, perfect. We have some lovely single rooms available." His enthusiasm was weird, but I figured he was just one of those overly friendly small-town types. When you're that isolated, I guess you get excited about any human interaction. I paid in cash, which he seemed weirdly happy about, and he gave me the key to room 14. The whole time he kept asking these questions that felt just a little too personal. Where was I headed? Was anyone expecting me? When did I plan to leave tomorrow? I gave vague answers, but something about his interest made me uneasy. The room was about what you'd expect for $45, cheap furniture from the 80s, carpet that had probably seen some things, and that distinct musty smell all cheap motels have. But I was too tired to care. I just wanted to crash and get back on the road early. I did my usual routine, checked for bed bugs, thankfully found none, put my own pillowcase on the pillow, learned that trick from too many sketchy motels, and took a quick shower. The water pressure was terrible, and the towels were scratchy, but again, for $45 I wasn't expecting the Ritz. It was when I was lying in bed almost asleep that things started getting weird. I heard footsteps outside my door. Now normally that wouldn't be strange in a motel, but these were slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my room. Then I heard this soft sound, like someone was very carefully trying the door handle. My heart started racing. I sat up in bed, completely alert now. The handle moved slightly, just enough to be visible in the dim light coming through the window. Then the footsteps moved away, but slowly, like whoever it was didn't really want to leave. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just another guest who got confused about their room number, but something felt off. I got up and checked the door. Thankfully, I'd used both locks, including the chain. I tried to go back to sleep, but now every little noise had me on edge. Around 2 a.m. I heard the footsteps again. This time they went past my door several times, back and forth, like someone pacing. I lay there perfectly still, barely breathing, straining to hear. The footsteps would stop occasionally, and each time I just knew, someone was standing right outside my door listening. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but still no service. The motel didn't have Wi-Fi, and my laptop couldn't pick up any networks nearby. I was completely cut off. Around 3 a.m. I heard a new sound, a key in the lock. My blood ran cold. The door handle turned, but the chain stopped it from opening. Through the small gap, I could see the manager's Hawaiian shirt. He stood there for what felt like forever, just holding the door open those few inches. Then he closed it softly and walked away. I was properly freaking out now. I pushed the room's only chair under the door handle and wedged my suitcase behind it. Then I sat on the bed, keeping watch, my car key between my knuckles as a makeshift weapon. The sun was just starting to come up when I heard engines starting outside. Carefully, I peeked through the curtains. 3 large trucks had pulled into the parking lot, the kind used for long-haul cargo. 6 men were talking to the manager, who kept gesturing toward the rooms. Something about the way they were looking around made my skin crawl. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My car had been blocked in by the trucks, and not just randomly. They had deliberately parked to make it impossible for me to pull out. I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my stuff as quietly as I could and looked out the bathroom window. It was small, but I thought I could squeeze through. It took some doing, and I scraped my arms pretty badly, but I managed to get out. I stayed low and moved along the building's back wall. I could hear the men's voices around front laughing about something. The manager's voice carried clearly. "Room 14, that's the one. Young woman, traveling alone. No one expecting her anywhere until tomorrow." I made it to the corner of the building and peered around. They were all facing the other way, looking at my room. The manager had a ring of keys in his hand. Moving as fast as I dared, I crept toward my car. If I could just get to it, maybe I could somehow squeeze past the trucks. Then I heard a shout. They'd opened my room and found it empty. Everything happened very fast after that. I sprinted to my car as they came running around the building. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock, but somehow I got in and started the engine. The manager and one of the men reached my car just as I locked the doors. They started pounding on the windows. The manager's friendly facade was completely gone. His face was contorted with rage as he screamed at me to get out of the car. I threw it in reverse and hit the gas. There was this horrible scraping sound as my car squeezed between the trucks, definitely leaving paint behind, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. In my rearview mirror, I saw them all running to their trucks. I floored it, pushing my old Honda harder than I ever had before. Those trucks chased me for almost 20 miles, getting so close sometimes I could see the drivers' faces in my mirrors. They finally gave up when I got close to the next town. I drove straight to the police station and reported everything. The cops went out there, but by then the place was deserted. All they found was an empty motel with decades of missing persons reports in the local records. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't heard those footsteps. The cops told me they found some pretty disturbing things in the basement. Chains, cages, worse stuff they wouldn't tell me about. They never caught the manager or figured out who those men in the trucks were. I still can't drive past motels at night without my heart racing. I check the locks 3 times before I go to bed, even in my own home. But mostly, I think about all the other travelers who must have pulled into that motel over the years, tired and looking for a cheap room, who weren't as lucky as I was. The Desert Palm Motel is shut down now, just another abandoned building in the Nevada desert. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I look up missing persons reports from that area. There are so many, too many, and those are just the ones that were reported. I wonder how many others just disappeared out there in the desert, where no one was expecting them until tomorrow. I've told this story to a few close friends, but I need to get it off my chest properly because I still can't sleep well at night. Even now, in my own apartment, I keep checking behind paintings and inside closets, paranoid that someone might be watching me. I work as a personal assistant in NYC, and one of my client's friends needed someone to house-sit their mansion for 2 weeks while they were in Europe. The pay was incredible, $2,000 for basically just keeping an eye on things and watering some plants. The house was this massive modern place right near the beach, probably worth $15 million or more. 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a home theater, the works. When I first arrived, I remember thinking how lucky I was. Free vacation in the Hamptons? Yes, please. The first couple of days were amazing. I worked remotely from their gorgeous kitchen island, swam in the pool, and watched movies in their theater room. But on the 4th night, things started getting weird. I was up late watching Netflix when I heard this faint scratching sound coming from inside one of the walls. At first I figured it was mice or something. Old houses make weird noises, right? But this was different. It sounded deliberate, almost like someone dragging their fingernails slowly across the drywall. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept moving, from the living room wall to the kitchen, then up toward the 2nd floor. I grabbed my phone and a kitchen knife and did a walkthrough of the house. Everything looked normal, all doors and windows locked. I checked every room upstairs, even the attic access. Nothing. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid and went to bed, but I barely slept that night. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front door was unlocked. I know I locked it the night before. I always do a security check before bed. I have OCD about that stuff. I texted my client asking if any staff members had access to the house. She said no, just me, and the owners had keys. That's when I started feeling really uneasy. That whole day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the scratching and the unlocked door. I ordered some security cameras on Amazon with next-day delivery. But that night, things got so much worse. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Not creaky floorboards, actual footsteps like someone trying to walk quietly but not quite succeeding. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. I lay there frozen, clutching my phone, trying to decide what to do. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Then I heard this sound that still haunts me. This weird, wet breathing, like someone with a cold trying to breathe through their nose. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute. Then the footsteps moved away, down the hall toward the master bedroom. As soon as I couldn't hear them anymore, I called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was in the house. They said officers were on their way. Those next 15 minutes waiting for the police were the longest of my life. I stayed absolutely still, afraid to even move under the covers. Every tiny sound made my heart race. When the police arrived, they did a full sweep of the house. They didn't find anyone inside, but they did find something disturbing. In the master bedroom closet, there was this small gap between the back wall and the shelving unit. When they shined their flashlight through it, they could see it opened into some kind of narrow space between the walls. They called for backup and began checking the walls more thoroughly. That's when they found it. A whole network of tunnels and crawl spaces running through the walls of the house. Some were original to the house's construction, spaces for plumbing and electrical work, but others had been clearly modified. They found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and this is the part that makes me sick. Little holes drilled into the walls of several rooms, including my bedroom. They were positioned at perfect eye level, hidden behind paintings or furniture. Whoever was in there had been watching me. The police found a makeshift living space in a larger void between the second and third floors. There was a sleeping bag, more food and water supplies, and pictures. Dozens of pictures taken through those holes in the walls. Some were of me, from just the past few days. Others were of the homeowners and their kids. This person had been living there and watching this family for God knows how long. The scariest part? They never caught them. The police think they fled through some access point when they heard the sirens. They found a removable panel in the garage wall that led to the outside. It had been painted to match perfectly. You'd never notice it unless you knew what to look for. They did find fingerprints and DNA evidence, but no matches in their database. The homeowners immediately put the house up for sale and hired a security team to stay there until it sells. They were horrified, especially about their kids being watched. They had no idea. The house is so big and the walls are thick enough that you wouldn't normally hear someone moving around in there. I quit my house-sitting gig immediately and went back to my apartment in the city. The police gave me some resources for trauma counseling, which I'm using. But I can't stop thinking about those nights I spent there, unknowingly sharing the house with someone who was watching my every move. How many times did they stand behind my bedroom wall, watching me sleep? What were they planning to do? I keep thinking about that weird breathing sound outside my door. Were they working up the courage to come in? The house is still on the market. Sometimes I check the listing photos online and I can't help but study the walls in every shot, looking for signs I missed. The realtor's description talks about the spacious open floor plan and original architectural details, but all I can think about is what's hiding between those walls. I know this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but I swear every word is true. I have a copy of the police report to prove it. Sometimes I wish it had just been my imagination, but the evidence was all there. Those pictures of me, the lived-in space in the walls, the perfectly positioned peepholes. Someone had turned that beautiful house into their own private surveillance system, watching and waiting for God knows what. I still have nightmares about those scratching sounds and that wet breathing outside my door. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced someone is watching me through my walls. My therapist says it'll take time to process the trauma, but how do you get over something like this? How do you ever feel safe again, knowing that behind any wall, there could be eyes watching you? The police stepped up patrols in that neighborhood, and they're investigating similar reports from other luxury homes in the area. Apparently, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. The detective told me there have been other cases of people living in walls of large houses, though usually they're just looking for a place to sleep. This was different. This person was systematic, organized. They had created an entire infrastructure for long-term surveillance. I'm sharing this as a warning to others. If you're house sitting, or even in your own home, and something feels off, a strange sound, an unlocked door you know you locked, don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid. Sometimes the scariest things aren't what goes bump in the night, but the silent observer behind the walls, watching, waiting, breathing that wet, raspy breath, biding their time for whatever they were planning to do to me that night. I've been trying to make sense of what happened last weekend for days now, but I still can't wrap my head around it. I need to write this down while it's fresh in my memory, even though my hands are shaking just thinking about it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me understand what we encountered out there. My friend Mike and I are experienced hikers. We've been doing weekend trails together for about 5 years now. Nothing crazy or extreme, just regular day hikes in the Cascade Mountains. We know the area pretty well and always come prepared with proper gear, GPS, emergency supplies, the works. What happened last Saturday wasn't anything we could have prepared for, though. We'd chosen a less popular trail that branches off from the main hiking path about 6 miles in. It's more overgrown and challenging, but that's what we like. Fewer tourists, more actual hiking. The weather was perfect that morning. Crisp autumn air, slightly overcast but dry. We got an early start, hitting the trailhead around 7 a.m. The first few hours were completely normal. We made good time, taking just a few short breaks. It was around 10:30 when we reached the fork where our trail split off from the main path. That's when things started getting weird, though we didn't realize it at first. I was leading the way, pushing through some undergrowth when Mike called out from behind me. "Hey, check this out." He was looking down at the ground, and I backtracked to see what he'd found. There was a single footprint in a patch of mud, just one, perfectly formed, like someone wearing a hiking boot had stepped there. But there were no other prints around it, before or after. Just this one isolated print. We thought it was odd, but didn't worry too much. Could have been old. Could have been someone jumping from a rock. There were plenty of explanations. We kept going, but now we were both unconsciously scanning the ground as we walked. About 20 minutes later, I spotted another one. Same thing. A single, clear footprint, but completely isolated. No other marks around it. This one looked fresher, though, and it was facing the direction we were heading. Mike noticed something I hadn't. It was the exact same size and tread pattern as the first one. That's when we started paying closer attention. Over the next hour, we found 6 more prints. Each one was solitary. Each one had the same tread pattern, and each one was pointing in our direction of travel. But the really unsettling part was that they seemed to be appearing in places we'd already walked past. We'd double back occasionally to check our route, and there would be prints in spots we were absolutely certain had been empty minutes before. The pattern started getting more obvious and more impossible. We'd see a print, walk another 100 yards, and find another one. But when we looked back, the first print would be gone like it had never been there. The ground wasn't wet enough for prints to just disappear like that. We started marking the locations with small piles of stones, thinking maybe we were just confused about where we'd seen them. But no, prints would vanish and appear somewhere new, always behind us, always pointing the way we were going. Around noon, the whole thing shifted from weird to terrifying. We'd stopped for lunch, sitting on some fallen logs, when Mike suddenly went quiet mid-sentence. He was staring past me, his face gone pale. About 15 feet behind where we were sitting was a fresh print. While we watched, and I swear on everything I hold dear this is true, another print just appeared in the dirt. No sound, no movement. Just suddenly there was a print where there hadn't been one before, and it was bigger than the previous ones. We didn't even discuss it, we just grabbed our packs and started moving fast. Not quite running, but close. Every few minutes we'd look back, and every time there would be a new print behind us bigger than the last. The distance between us and the prints started shrinking. First they were appearing 50 feet behind us, then 30, then 20. The real breaking point came when we heard it. We'd been moving for maybe an hour trying to make our way back to the main trail, when there was this sound, like footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too heavy, too spaced out, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, We broke into a full run then. I'm not proud of it, but panic had completely taken over. We weren't even trying to navigate properly anymore, just running downhill, hoping we'd hit the main trail eventually. The prints kept appearing, now just feet behind us, and they were huge, easily twice the size of my boot. Then I slipped. It had started to drizzle, making the ground treacherous, and my feet just went out from under me. I went down hard, skinning my palms on the rocks. Mike helped me up, and that's when we saw it. There was a print right next to where I'd fallen. But this one was different. It was my print from my boot, perfectly preserved in the mud. Except it was pointing in the opposite direction, away from the trail, into the densest part of the forest. And it wasn't a print I'd just made. It was like someone wearing my exact boots had walked away from where I fell, even though I'd never moved in that direction. We made it back to the main trail somehow. The prints stopped appearing once we reached it, and we practically ran the 6 miles back to our car. We didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? I've been back through our photos from the hike. We took several early on before things got strange. The prints don't show up in any of them, even in shots where I specifically remember seeing them when we took the picture. Mike won't talk about it now. He's deleted all his photos from that day and says he's done with hiking for a while. I keep checking my hiking boots, comparing them to the photos I took of those first few prints. The tread pattern isn't the same anymore. I know that sounds impossible. They're the same boots. I haven't bought new ones. But the pattern is different now. And sometimes when I get home from work, I find single muddy footprints on my front porch. Just one at a time. Always in different spots. Always pointing toward my door. Always with the tread pattern from that day on the trail. I don't know what followed us that day. I don't know if it's still following us now. But I know what I saw. And I know those prints were real. I just hope writing this down will help me process it somehow, because I haven't had a full night's sleep since it happened. Every time I close my eyes, I see that last print, my own boot print, pointing away into the forest, like some other version of me walked away into those woods and never came back. I still get chills every time I have to use a motel bathroom at night. What happened to me 3 months ago completely changed how I feel about mirrors, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at my reflection the same way again. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. I was driving from Chicago to Denver for a job interview. I'd been on the road for about 14 hours, and it was getting close to midnight. My eyes were starting to feel heavy, and I knew I needed to stop. I was somewhere in western Nebraska, on one of those endless stretches of I-80 where the towns are few and far between. The rain wasn't helping either. It had been drizzling steadily for the past couple hours, making the road slick and visibility poor. When I saw the vacancy sign of the Pine Grove Motel glowing dimly through the rain, I didn't think twice. It was one of those typical roadside motels, single-story, maybe 20 rooms tops, with a small office at one end. The kind of place that probably hadn't been renovated since the 90s. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 other cars scattered across it. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting an intermittent red glow across the wet pavement. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with thick glasses and thinning gray hair. The office smelled like stale cigarettes and coffee. I paid cash for the room, $45 for the night. Room 115, he said, handing me an actual key with a plastic tag instead of a key card. That should have been my first clue that this place was seriously dated. The room was exactly what you'd expect for that price. Worn carpet, faded wallpaper, a bed that had seen better days. But I was too tired to care. All I wanted was a quick shower and some sleep. The bathroom was small but clean enough. Typical motel setup. Toilet sink with a medicine cabinet above it and a shower tub combo with a slightly mildewed curtain. I turned on the bathroom light, one of those harsh fluorescent tubes that makes everything look sickly, and started getting ready for bed. That's when I noticed something was off with my reflection. At first, it was so subtle I thought I was just tired. You know how sometimes when you're exhausted, your depth perception gets weird? But this was different. I raised my right hand to rub my eyes, but in the mirror, my reflection raised its left hand. It was such a small thing that I actually had to do it again to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I was definitely moving my right hand, but my reflection was using its left. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself I was just overtired and seeing things. Then I noticed the delay. When I moved, my reflection would follow a split second later, like a video feed with bad lag. I leaned closer to the mirror, and my reflection did the same, but its movements were jerky, unnatural. The worst part? Its eyes didn't quite match mine. They were my eyes, but there was something wrong about them. They looked darker somehow, empty. I backed away from the mirror, and my reflection stayed put for a fraction of a second too long before following. By now, my hands were shaking. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to wake myself up, convinced I was having some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination. But when I looked up, my reflection wasn't splashing water on its face. It was just standing there, watching me. That's when I heard it. A whisper so faint I almost missed it over the sound of the running water. "Don't look back." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't male or female, young or old. It was just wrong. Like someone trying to remember how to speak after years of silence. I gripped the edges of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. In the mirror, my reflection's hands were at its sides. It was smiling now. Not a friendly smile, but something predatory. Something hungry. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, like a curious animal. "Don't look back." The whisper was louder this time, more insistent. The fluorescent light flickered, and for a split second I swear my reflection's smile got wider than any human mouth should be able to. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My reflection raised its hand and pressed it against its side of the mirror. I watched in horror as its fingers seemed to push through, like the glass was turning to water. That's when I finally broke free from my paralysis and bolted for the door. Behind me, I heard a sound like cracking glass, followed by what I can only describe as wet footsteps. Everything in me screamed not to turn around, but you know how sometimes fear makes you do stupid things? I looked back. My reflection was standing in the bathroom doorway, but it wasn't mimicking me anymore. Its posture was all wrong, like a puppet being held up by strings. Its smile had grown impossibly wide, splitting its face almost ear to ear. But the eyes were the worst. They were completely black now, like empty holes in its face. I ran. I didn't grab my bags, my phone, or even my shoes. I just ran out of that room as fast as I could, the key still in my pocket. I sprinted across the parking lot, the rain soaking me to the bone. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I struggled to unlock it. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I caught one last glimpse of my room in the rearview mirror. The door was still open, light spilling out into the rain. And there, standing in the doorway, was my reflection. It raised its hand in a wave, that terrible smile still splitting its face. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky. I left all my stuff in that room, clothes, laptop, everything. I called the motel the next day from a gas station payphone, but the number was disconnected. A week later, when I had worked up the courage, I looked up the Pine Grove Motel online. According to Google Maps, there's nothing but empty fields for miles along that stretch of I-80. Sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror or a window, I find myself counting the seconds between my movements and my reflections. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see that smile starting to form in the mirror, and I have to look away. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I know. If someone told me this story 3 months ago, I would have thought they were making it up or had some kind of mental break. Maybe that's what happened to me. Maybe I dozed off while driving and dreamed the whole thing. But I can't explain the missing bags, or why that motel seems to have vanished into thin air. And I definitely can't explain why. Ever since that night, My reflection sometimes seems to move just a fraction of a second too late. I still have the room key. I keep it in a drawer, wrapped in an old t-shirt. Sometimes I take it out just to prove to myself that it wasn't all in my head. The plastic tag is faded, but you can still make out the number, 115. I've thought about trying to find that stretch of highway again to see if the motel is really gone. But every time I consider it, I hear that whisper in the back of my mind, "Don't look back." So I don't. I keep driving forward, and I try not to think about what might have happened if I'd stayed in that bathroom just a few seconds longer. If I'd given my reflection time to push all the way through the mirror. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if somewhere out there in some other motel bathroom there's another version of me telling this same story. Only in their version, they're the reflection, and I'm the one who stepped through the glass. I still get chills every time I drive past any tunnel, even the well-lit ones on major highways. What happened last month has completely messed with my head, and I've been struggling to sleep ever since. I know this might sound crazy, but I need to get this off my chest even if no one believes me. My best friend Jake and I were on our way back from a camping trip in the Ozarks. We'd taken my old Honda Civic, which wasn't exactly built for those mountain roads, but it had gotten us through worse before. It was around 4 p.m., and we were trying to make it back home before dark when our GPS started acting up. The signal kept cutting in and out, typical for those back roads, so we decided to take what looked like a shortcut on our paper map. Yeah, we actually brought one as backup. The road wasn't great, all cracked asphalt and faded lines, but it seemed like it would save us about an hour. We were joking around, still riding the high from our camping trip, when we spotted this weird turnoff that wasn't marked on our map. There was this old tunnel entrance partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, with one of those metal signs that was so rusted you could barely make out the "Do Not Enter" warning. Now I know what you're thinking. Who in their right mind stops to check out a sketchy tunnel in the middle of nowhere? But the thing is, Jake's really into urban exploration and photography. He'd been talking about wanting to find some cool abandoned places to shoot, and I guess we both got caught up in the moment. Plus, it was still daylight. We had our phones with flashlights, and honestly, what's the worst that could happen? The entrance wasn't blocked off or anything, just overgrown. We parked the car off to the side and grabbed our backpacks. I made sure to bring water and the emergency flashlight from my car. Basic common sense stuff. The tunnel looked old but solid, probably from the 1950s or 60s. You could still see some of the old construction marks on the concrete. The first thing that hit me when we stepped inside was the temperature drop. It wasn't gradual like you'd expect. It was like walking into a freezer. Jake didn't seem to notice. He was too busy taking pictures with his phone. The tunnel was maybe 15 feet wide, with a curved ceiling about 20 feet high. Our flashlights showed old electrical fixtures on the walls, long dead. We'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes when I first heard it. At first I thought it was just our footsteps echoing, but something was off about the rhythm. It sounded like someone walking just slightly out of sync with us. I grabbed Jake's arm and made him stop. We both stood completely still, and that's when we heard it clear as day. Footsteps somewhere behind us, and this weird, raspy breathing. Jake tried to play it cool, saying it was probably just the wind or some animal. But I've been in tunnels before, and this wasn't like any echo or wind noise I'd ever heard. It sounded deliberate, like something was following us, but trying not to be too obvious about it. We picked up our pace, thinking we'd just get to the other end and get out of there. The tunnel had seemed straight when we entered, but now it felt like it was curving slightly to the left. Our flashlight beams didn't reach the end, it was just darkness ahead of us. After about 10 minutes of walking, Jake stopped suddenly. "This isn't right," he said. "We should have reached the end by now." He was right. Even at a slow walk, we should have gone through the whole thing. I turned around to look back, and that's when my blood ran cold. The tunnel behind us wasn't the same one we'd walked through. Instead of one straight path, there were now 3 different tunnels branching off. I swear on everything I love, those splits hadn't been there before. Jake started freaking out, thinking we'd somehow missed a turn, but I knew we hadn't. We'd been walking in a straight line the whole time. That's when the breathing sound got louder. It wasn't behind us anymore. It seemed to be coming from all directions at once. And the footsteps, they were faster now, like whatever was making them was getting excited. We picked a tunnel at random and started running. The beam of our flashlights bounced wildly off the walls, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The walls were different. The old concrete was now covered in these weird organic-looking patterns like veins or roots, but they were moving ever so slightly, pulsing like they were alive. Every time we reached another split, we just picked a direction and kept going. But it felt like we were going in circles even though we tried to keep track of our turns. The temperature kept dropping, and our breath was coming out in visible clouds now. Then the walls started moving. Not like an earthquake or cave-in. They were literally closing in on us like the tunnel was breathing. The ceiling started getting lower too, forcing us to hunch over as we ran. The footsteps behind us were so close now, and the breathing had turned into this horrible wheezing sound. I don't know how long we ran. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like lead. Jake was right beside me and I could hear him crying between gasps for air. The tunnel kept getting narrower and narrower, and the walls were practically pulsing now, covered in those moving, vein-like patterns. We rounded another corner and suddenly hit a dead end. Just a solid wall where the tunnel should have continued. We turned around to go back, but the tunnel behind us had changed again. Now it split into 5 different paths, all of them seemingly identical. That's when we heard it. A sound like stone grinding against stone, but wet somehow. The walls were closing in faster now, and the ceiling was so low we had to crouch. The veins on the walls were definitely moving, reaching out toward us like fingers. Jake completely lost it. He started screaming and just picked a tunnel at random, running full speed. I followed him because what else could I do? The grinding sound was getting louder, and I could feel the air getting thicker, harder to breathe. I don't remember exactly what happened next. Everything's a blur of running, screaming, and that horrible breathing sound getting closer and closer. The walls kept shifting around us, tunnels appearing and disappearing like some kind of nightmare maze. Then, out of nowhere, we saw light. Natural light, coming from ahead of us. We ran toward it like our lives depended on it, which they probably did. The tunnel behind us was literally collapsing in on itself, and I could feel something reaching for my back, like cold, wet fingers just barely missing my shirt. We burst out into daylight, tumbling onto the ground. When we looked back, we were at the same entrance we'd gone in through. Our car was right there where we'd left it. But here's the thing that still haunts me. According to our phones, only 20 minutes had passed. How is that possible when we spent what felt like hours running through that maze? We got in the car and drove away as fast as we could. Neither of us spoke for hours. Jake threw up twice on the drive home. We've tried to find that tunnel again. We even went back the next weekend with some other friends, but the turnoff was gone. Just solid rock face where the entrance had been. I've spent weeks trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe we accidentally inhaled some kind of toxic gas that made us hallucinate. Maybe the tunnel was some kind of old military experiment site. But none of those explanations account for everything we experienced. The weirdest part? Ever since that day, both Jake and I have been having the same dream. We're back in that tunnel, but this time, we can see what's following us. We always wake up before we get a clear look at it, but the image that stays with me is of something huge, something that's part of the tunnel itself, like the whole place was one living organism that was trying to digest us. I know how this sounds. Trust me, if someone told me this story a month ago, I would have thought they were making it up or were on drugs. But this happened. The growing bruises on our backs from where something grabbed at us through our shirts are real. The weird vein-like marks that showed up on our shoes are real. And the breathing. God, sometimes I still hear that breathing when I'm trying to sleep. I don't expect anyone to believe this. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if I hadn't lived through it. But I needed to share this somewhere. And if you ever find yourself on a back road in the Ozarks and see a tunnel that's not on any map, just keep driving. Some places aren't meant to be explored. I've been a farmer my whole life, just like my father and his father before him. Never been one for crazy stories or supernatural stuff. I'm about as down-to-earth as they come. But what happened last October has been eating away at me, and I need to get it off my chest. I still can't explain it, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I live alone on my family's farm in eastern Nebraska, about 30 miles from the nearest town. It's peaceful out here, just me and my crops, and I like it that way. That evening started like any other. I was doing my usual sunset check of the cornfields, something I've done thousands of times before. The harvest was coming up, and I wanted to make sure everything was ready for the next day. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. There was this strange stillness in the air. You know that heavy feeling right before a storm? Except there wasn't a cloud in sight. The first thing that felt off was the complete silence. Usually you'd hear crickets, maybe some birds heading to roost, the rustle of corn in the breeze. But there was nothing. Absolute dead silence. That's when I noticed the first shadow. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. You know how your vision gets weird in low light. It was moving across the field, but there was nothing above casting it. No birds, no clouds, nothing. Just this dark shape sliding over the corn stalks like an oil slick on water. My hands started sweating on the fence post I was leaning against. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff out here. Weather phenomena, light tricks, you name it. But this was different. The shadow was moving against the direction of the setting sun, which is just wrong. Then I saw another one, and another. They were getting bigger, more defined. I'm not proud to admit it, but my first instinct was to get my phone out and record it. Stupid, right? But when I tried, my phone was dead. It had been at 80% just minutes before, but now, nothing. The temperature seemed to drop about 20 degrees in seconds. I could see my breath even though it had been a warm October day. That's when I heard it. My voice. My own goddamn voice coming from somewhere in the field, calling out, "Help me!" It wasn't an echo, wasn't a recording. It was my voice with that slight southern drawl I got from my mom, the way I clear my throat before speaking. Details only I would know about how I sound. I'm not ashamed to say I started backing away toward the house. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but you know that feeling where you're so scared you're almost moving in slow motion? That's what it was like. As I turned to run, the shadows started moving faster. They were flowing across the ground like spilled ink, but now they were starting to rise up, taking shape. The worst part? They were forming into my silhouette. Exact copies of me, but made of this deep, dark nothing. You know how when you look at a really deep hole and your mind can't quite process the depth? That's what these things looked like. They were three-dimensional voids in the shape of my body. I ran. God help me. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. The shadows were faster. They flowed around me, through me. Have you ever had sleep paralysis? That cold, heavy feeling of something evil being right there? Multiply that by 100. Every time one passed through me, it felt like being dunked in ice water, but the cold went straight to my bones, to my soul. The weirdest part? I could feel what they were feeling. Every time one touched me, I got this overwhelming sense of hunger, of emptiness, of desperate need. But not for food or anything physical. They were hungry for me. For my life, my memories, my existence. I made it to the house, slammed the door, and locked it. I know how stupid that sounds now. Like a door would stop something that could flow under it like smoke. But it's what you do, right? You grab onto any normal thing you can when the world stops making sense. I backed into my living room, shadows seeping under the door, through the windows. They were fully formed now, perfect copies of me, but wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too fluid. And their faces, I could see my own face on them, but the expressions were all wrong. Like something wearing a mask of me, trying to figure out how to make it work. They surrounded me and the voice came again. My voice, but from all of them at once. Help me, join me, be me. The room was ice cold now, and I could barely breathe. The shadows were closing in, and I could feel myself getting weaker, like they were somehow draining the life out of the air itself. Just when I thought it was over, when the shadows were literally inches from me, the sun finally set completely. Total darkness fell and they vanished. Just like that. 1 second they were there, the next, nothing. The room temperature returned to normal. My phone turned back on like nothing had happened. And I was alone. I'd like to say I packed up and left that night, but this farm has been in my family for 4 generations. Where would I even go? What would I tell people? So I stayed. That was 3 months ago, and nothing like it has happened since. But every sunset I'm inside before dusk. Every time I catch a glimpse of my own shadow, my heart stops for a second. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm alone in the fields, I swear I can hear my own voice calling from far away. I've thought about setting up cameras, but part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me thinks that looking too hard for answers might invite them back. All I know is that whatever those things were, they're still out there, and they're wearing my face. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. What happened that night on Route 43 still haunts me, and I find myself constantly questioning everything I experienced. Maybe writing it down will help me process it, or at least help me feel less crazy about the whole thing. I work as a night shift nurse at Memorial Hospital, about an hour from my home. The commute usually doesn't bother me. I've always been a night person, and the empty roads give me time to decompress after dealing with the intensity of the ER. That night started like any other. My shift had ended at 3 a.m., and I was making my usual drive home along the winding country roads. It was early March, and there was this unsettling fog that had settled in, the kind that makes the headlights bounce back at you and forces you to drive slower than usual. I had my regular late-night radio station playing softly, some mix of old rock songs that usually keeps me alert on these drives. About halfway through my route, I noticed something I'd never seen before. There was this small roadside shrine, just barely visible in my headlights. I've driven this road hundreds of times, but somehow I'd never noticed it. Maybe it was new, or maybe the fog was making me pay more attention to my surroundings than usual. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was exhaustion from my 12-hour shift. Or maybe it was that sense of solidarity you develop working in emergency medicine. You see so many tragic cases, and each one stays with you. I pulled over, putting my hazards on even though there wasn't another car in sight. The shrine was simple but heartbreaking. A small white cross decorated with weather-worn ribbons, some artificial flowers that had clearly been there for a while, and a framed photo protected by a plastic covering. In the beam of my flashlight, I could make out the face of a little girl, probably around 7 or 8, with these bright blue eyes and the kind of smile that just radiates pure joy. Below the photo was a small plaque, in loving memory of Sarah Mitchell, 2014-2022. Forever, our little angel. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the same one I get when we lose a young patient in the ER. 8 years old, just a baby really. I said a quick prayer, even though I'm not particularly religious, and was about to head back to my car when the temperature suddenly dropped. I'm not talking about a slight chill. It was like stepping into a freezer. My breath came out in visible puffs, which made no sense for a March night in Georgia. That's when I heard it, a giggle. Just a quick, light sound, like when kids try to hold in their laughter. It came from somewhere behind me, near the tree line. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog, but there was nothing there. Just the mist swirling in the light. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a bird or something. But then I heard what sounded like footsteps, small, quick steps on the gravel shoulder of the road. They seemed to be moving toward my car. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my keys from my pocket. I'm not usually the jumpy type. You can't be when you work in an ER, but something about this felt wrong. As I approached my car, I could see my breath clouding in front of me, even though my weather app said it was 65 degrees outside. I got in and locked the doors immediately. When I tried to start the car, nothing happened. Just that awful clicking sound of a dead battery. This made no sense. My car was only 2 years old, and I'd never had any problems with it. That's when I made the mistake of looking in my rearview mirror. There was a face there, not reflected from outside, but right in the back seat. It was the same little girl from the photo, but different. Her eyes weren't bright anymore. They were dark and hollow, and her skin was a sickly gray color. She wasn't smiling now. She looked lost, confused, like she didn't understand why she was there either. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. The temperature inside the car plummeted so low that frost started forming on the inside of the windows. Then the radio came on by itself. It wasn't playing rock music anymore. Instead, this tinny, distorted version of Ring Around the Rosie started playing. The sound was awful, like it was coming through ancient speakers with this static underneath that almost sounded like whispering. I squeezed my eyes shut. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I kept telling myself this wasn't real, that I was just overtired from my shift, that maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and this was all a dream. When I finally forced myself to look in the mirror again, she was gone. The radio cut out mid-song, leaving nothing but the sound of my own panicked breathing. My car started on the first try, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. I drove home doing 80 the whole way, not caring about speed limits or fog or anything else. When I got home, I immediately researched the accident. I found a local news article about Sarah Mitchell. She'd been killed in a hit and run at that exact spot. The driver was never found. The thing that really gets to me, though, is what happened the next day. I was so freaked out that I called in sick to work. While I was cleaning my car to help calm my nerves, something I do when I'm stressed, I found something in the back seat. It was a small friendship bracelet, the kind kids make with embroidery thread. It was old and faded, but you could still make out the pattern of pink and purple threads woven together. I went back to the shrine the next day, in broad daylight. The bracelet in the photo around Sarah's wrist was identical to the one I'd found in my car. I left it at the shrine, along with some fresh flowers. I still drive that route to work. I have to. But I never stop there anymore. Sometimes, though, when I drive past late at night, my radio will catch a few notes of that nursery rhyme through the static. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear distant laughter carried on the wind. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Most days, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know what I experienced that night, and I know that bracelet was real. I've seen a lot of death in my job, but this was different. It felt like Sarah was trying to tell me something, but I was too scared to listen. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd tried to communicate somehow. The rational part of my brain, the nurse who deals in facts and science, tries to explain it away. Exhaustion, stress, an overactive imagination fueled by too many night shifts. But then I remember the absolute cold, that hollow look in her eyes, and that bracelet. And I know that some things just can't be explained by logic. I've never shared this story before now, partially because I was afraid people would think I was crazy, but mostly because it still feels so raw, so personal. I can still perfectly picture her face in that photo at the shrine, full of life and joy, and how it contrasted with what I saw in my mirror that night. It's been months now, and I still catch myself checking my rearview mirror more often than I need to, especially on foggy nights. The strangest part? Ever since that night, whenever we get a critical pediatric case in the ER, I seem to have an unexplained sense of whether they're going to make it or not. It's like some part of me just knows. My colleagues call it good instinct or experience, but I can't help wondering if that night left me with some kind of connection to whatever exists between life and death. I don't stop at roadside memorials anymore. Not because I don't care, but because I've learned that sometimes, when you acknowledge the dead, they acknowledge you back. And once that door is opened, you can never be quite sure it's fully closed again. I've been hunting for over 15 years now, and I've always felt at peace in the woods. My cabin in northern Michigan has been my sanctuary, especially during deer season. But what happened last week? I still can't sleep properly. I keep checking the windows, jumping at every little noise. I need to write this down. Maybe someone can help me make sense of it. I own this small hunting cabin about 30 miles from the nearest town. It's nothing fancy, just a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. But it's mine, and I've always felt safe there. Last Tuesday, I decided to set up a new trail camera I'd bought. I wanted to track the deer movements near my favorite hunting spot, about 200 yards from my cabin. The camera was one of those newer models with night vision and motion sensors. I secured it to a thick oak tree facing a well-used game trail. I remember being excited about finally upgrading from my old broken camera. It was around 4 p.m. when I finished setting it up, and I spent the rest of the evening doing routine maintenance around the cabin, checking the generator, storing some firewood, normal stuff. That night I went to bed around 10 p.m. like usual. Nothing felt off. Just another quiet night in the woods. The next few days were uneventful. I did some hunting, made some repairs to the cabin's roof, and basically just enjoyed the solitude. On Friday afternoon, I decided to check the trail cam. I remember it was getting dark early because of the overcast sky. The air felt heavy, like it does before a storm. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to retrieve the SD card. Back in my cabin, I plugged the card into my laptop. The first few photos were what you'd expect: deer, raccoons, a fox. But then, my hands started shaking when I saw the next set of images. They were photos of me, inside my cabin, sleeping. The timestamps showed they were from Wednesday night. The camera was still attached to that oak tree, 200 yards away. There was no way it could have taken these photos. But there I was, clearly visible through my bedroom window, sleeping in my bed. The photos were taken about 15 minutes apart, starting at 2:13 a.m. I felt my stomach turn as I clicked through them. In each photo, I was in the same position, sleeping on my right side. But in the last photo, time-stamped 3:48 a.m., there was something else. A dark figure, standing at the foot of my bed. It was blurry, like it was moving when the photo was taken, but I could make out what looked like a tall, thin shape. It seemed to be leaning slightly forward, as if it was watching me sleep. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped my laptop. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from outside. It sounded like branches dragging across the cabin's outer wall. But there weren't any trees close enough to touch the cabin. I sat completely still, barely breathing. The scraping stopped, and for a few seconds, there was absolute silence. Then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps in the leaves outside. They were moving around the cabin, towards my window. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. My eyes were fixed on the window, and that's when I saw it. In the growing darkness outside, a figure was standing there, watching me. It was exactly like the blurry shape from the photo, but now it was real, solid. I could make out long, thin limbs, and what seemed like an unnaturally elongated head. It wasn't moving, just staring. I finally managed to move. I scrambled away from the window, grabbing my rifle from beside the bed. When I looked back, the figure was gone. My hands shaking, I turned on every light in the cabin and checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked just as I'd left it. I sat in the corner of my bedroom, rifle in hand, until sunrise. As soon as there was enough light, I went back to my laptop to look at those photos again to prove to myself I hadn't imagined it all. But when I opened the folder, the photos of me sleeping were gone. Only the normal trail cam photos remained. The deer, raccoons, and fox. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The cabin door, which I distinctly remembered locking the night before, was now slightly open. Just an inch or so, but enough to let in a cold draft. I packed my things and left within 10 minutes. I haven't been back to the cabin since. I've thought about selling it, but I feel like I need to understand what happened first. The trail camera is still out there, strapped to that oak tree. Sometimes I wonder what it's recording now, what it sees in the darkness when no one is around. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, It's the questions I can't answer. How did my trail camera, secured to a tree 200 yards away, take photos through my bedroom window? Why were the photos deleted? And most importantly, what was that thing, and how long had it been watching me before I discovered those photos? I've been staying at my sister's house in town, but I know I'll have to go back eventually. My gear is still there, and hunting season isn't over. But every time I think about that cabin, about whatever was standing at the foot of my bed while I slept, I break out in a cold sweat. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe they somehow hacked my trail cam. But deep down, I know that's not what happened. That figure wasn't human. The way it moved, its proportions, everything about it was wrong. I'm writing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. Those woods have always felt alive to me, but now they feel watched. Like there's something out there that's been there all along, something that's finally decided to make itself known. The rational part of my brain keeps telling me there must be a logical explanation. But then I remember the sound of those footsteps in the leaves, the sight of that figure standing motionless outside my window, and the way my cabin door was open when I knew I'd locked it. And I realized that some things can't be explained by logic. I still have the trail camera's memory card. Sometimes I think about checking it again to see if those photos might somehow reappear, but I'm afraid of what else I might find. For now, it stays locked in my desk drawer, along with the key to my cabin. Maybe someday I'll find the courage to go back. But for now, every time I close my eyes, I see that blurry figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. And I wonder, how many nights did it stand there before I finally saw those photos? I've been a farmer in Nebraska my whole life, just like my father and his father before him. I've seen my share of weird things out in the fields, crazy weather patterns, unusual animal behavior, you name it. But what happened to me last October, I still can't make sense of it. I'm only writing this down now because I need to tell someone, and my wife thinks I'm losing my mind. It was during harvest season, and I'd been working longer hours than usual to get everything done before the first frost. The corn was ready, tall, golden, and dense. Anyone who's worked cornfields knows how they can play tricks on your mind. The way the stalks rustle in the wind, how they tower over you at full height, creating endless corridors of green and gold. But this was different. That night, I was in my workshop behind the house fixing some equipment for the next day's harvest. It was around 9 p.m., and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath. The workshop's just at the edge of the cornfield, and I always keep the door open while I'm working. Helps with ventilation and lets me hear if any animals are getting into trouble. I was deep into fixing a broken chain on one of the combines when I first heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it became clearer. A whisper. "James." Just my name, soft and uncertain, like someone trying to get my attention without wanting to startle me. It came from somewhere in the field. I've dealt with trespassers before, mostly teenagers looking for a thrill or trying to steal some corn. But something about this voice made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like a kid messing around. It sounded desperate. "James, I'm pleased to help." The voice was clearer now and definitely coming from the cornfield. I grabbed my flashlight and phone, thinking maybe someone had gotten lost or hurt out there. It happens sometimes. People underestimate how easy it is to lose your orientation in a cornfield, especially at night. The moment I stepped into the field, the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, creating strange shadows between the corn stalks. The plants were still at full height, almost 9 feet tall, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. That's when I noticed the handprints. They were pressed into the stalks about chest height, like someone had been pushing their way through. But they weren't normal handprints. They were deeply pressed into the stalks, almost like they'd been burned in. The corn around the prints was darkened and wilted, while the rest of the plants were perfectly healthy. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The whispers came again, this time from behind me. "James, Help us. Us. Not me. Us. I spun around, but there was nothing there except more corridors of corn stretching into darkness. I tried to mark my path by breaking stalks as I walked. An old farmer's trick, but something wasn't right. The broken stalks would somehow be standing upright again when I looked back. My phone's GPS wasn't working either. The screen just showed a spinning loading symbol like it couldn't figure out where I was. I wasn't too worried yet. I knew this field like the back of my hand. I'd grown up here, worked here my entire life. Getting lost should have been impossible. But after walking for what felt like 15 minutes, I couldn't find my way back to the edge. The workshop lights should have been visible. They're bright enough to see from anywhere in this section of the field. But all I could see was corn, and more corn. The whispers were getting louder now, coming from multiple directions. James, why did you leave us? Why did you let this happen? The voices were changing, becoming more accusatory. Some sounded like children, others like elderly people, all of them speaking with this horrible pleading tone that made my skin crawl. I tried to run. Bad idea in a cornfield at night, but panic was taking over. The stalks whipped at my face and arms as I pushed through them. The voices followed, getting louder and more numerous. They weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming my name, screaming for help, screaming in pain. I tripped over something and fell hard. When I pushed myself up, my hands came away wet and sticky. My flashlight had fallen nearby, and in its beam I could see that my hands were covered in some dark liquid. It wasn't blood. It was too thick, too dark, almost black. It smelled like rotting vegetation and something else, something chemical and wrong. The screaming was all around me now. The corn stalks were moving, but there was no wind. They were bending toward me, like they were reaching for me. More of that black liquid was dripping from their leaves. The handprints were everywhere now, glowing slightly in the darkness, like cooling embers. I heard something moving through the corn behind me, not like a person or an animal. It was like a massive wave, making the stalks bow and break as it approached. The screams reached a fever pitch, and I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. That's the last thing I remember clearly. I woke up at sunrise, lying at the edge of the field near my workshop. My clothes were shredded and caked with dirt and that same black substance, though it had dried to a crusty powder. I had scratches all over my arms and face, like I'd been running through thorns instead of corn. The weird thing is, when I went back to check the field in daylight, everything looked normal. No handprints, no broken stalks, no black liquid. The corn was perfectly healthy, gently swaying in the morning breeze like nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, that I'd been working too hard and maybe dozed off in the workshop and had some kind of vivid nightmare. But I know what I experienced. The scratches were real, the torn clothes were real, and sometimes late at night when I'm lying in bed, I still hear those whispers calling my name. I've been farming that land for 30 years and nothing like this had ever happened before. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. I found a small notebook in my workshop the next day, covered in that same black residue. Inside, written in handwriting that looks disturbingly like my own but isn't, are just 2 words. Still here. I'm still harvesting that field. I have to. It's my livelihood. But I don't go out there at night anymore. And sometimes when I'm working during the day, I swear I can see handprints appearing on the stalks out of the corner of my eye, only to disappear when I turn to look at them directly. The whispers haven't returned, but I know they're waiting. Waiting for another dark night when I let my guard down. What scares me most isn't what happened that night. It's the feeling that whatever's out there in my cornfield isn't finished with me yet. I've been a long-haul trucker for nearly 15 years now, and what happened last Tuesday night still has me shaken to my core. I've driven through every kind of weather and on every type of road you can imagine, but I've never experienced anything like this. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone, and honestly, I don't know who else would believe me. I was driving my usual route through rural Oregon, heading east on Highway 20 towards Burns. It was around 11 p.m., and the fog was the thickest I'd seen in years, the kind where your high beams just bounce right back at you. I had to slow down to about 35 mph just to see the edge of the road. The radio was mostly static at that point, so I'd turned it off. Just me, the hum of my engine, and that wall of white mist. About 40 miles outside of Burns, I spotted something by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just another shadow playing tricks on me. The fog does that, makes you see things that aren't there. But as I got closer, I could make out a figure, a person, standing completely still, thumb out. I know. Picking up hitchhikers is against company policy, and honestly, I never do it. But something about this scene felt different. The temperature gauge on my dash read 28 degrees, and out there in the middle of nowhere, in that kind of weather, I couldn't just drive past. I slowed down and pulled over. Through my passenger window, I could see it was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing what looked like an old army jacket. He didn't say anything, just opened the back door and got in. I remember thinking it was weird he chose the back seat when the front was empty, but I figured maybe he was just being cautious. Hell, I probably would be too if I was getting into a stranger's truck at night. "Where you headed?" I asked, checking him out in my rearview mirror. His face was pale, almost gray in the dim light, and he was staring straight ahead. The jacket looked wet, even though it hadn't been raining. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched out so long I started to regret my decision to stop. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Almost there," he said, pointing forward with a dirty hand. I noticed his fingers left smudges on the air. Actual smudges, like when you touch a clean window. That's when my stomach started to knot up. Something wasn't right here. His reflection in my rearview mirror was off somehow. It's hard to explain, but it was like looking at a photograph that's slightly out of focus. We drove in silence for maybe 10 minutes. The fog seemed to get thicker, if that was even possible. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. He never moved, never blinked, just kept staring straight ahead with those empty eyes. Then he pointed again. "Almost there," he repeated, but this time his voice sounded different, like it was coming from underwater or very far away. I looked back at the road for just a second, and when I checked the mirror again, the back seat was empty. My heart nearly stopped. I slammed on the brakes, skidding a little on the wet asphalt. The truck came to a stop right in the middle of the road, but I didn't care. I turned around completely in my seat, but there was no one there. No sign anyone had ever been there. Except there were handprints on the window. Not normal handprints. These were smeared with what looked like dirt and something darker, something red. They were smeared downward, like someone had dragged their hands down the glass. I don't remember much about the next few miles. I just drove, probably faster than I should have in that fog, until I reached the truck stop outside Burns. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely put the truck in park. Inside, I must have looked as bad as I felt because the guy behind the counter, this older man named Jim, who I've known for years, immediately asked if I was okay. I told him what happened, feeling like an idiot the whole time, expecting him to laugh. But he didn't laugh. His face went kind of pale, and he asked me exactly where I'd picked up the hitchhiker. When I told him, he pulled out his phone and showed me something that made my blood run cold. It was a post from a local truckers' Facebook group, dated 3 years ago. Another driver had posted about picking up a man in an army jacket at the exact same spot. The man had sat in the back seat, said only, "Almost there," and disappeared, leaving bloody handprints on the window. The post had dozens of comments from other drivers sharing similar stories going back at least 15 years. Jim told me that stretch of Highway 20 used to be different before they rerouted it in the 80s. In 1978, there was a horrible accident there. A military transport vehicle went off the road in heavy fog, killing everyone inside. They never found all the bodies. I've driven that route 6 times since then, always in daylight. The fog's never been that thick again, and I haven't seen any hitchhikers. But sometimes when I pass that spot, my rearview mirror catches something that might be a shadow, might be a reflection, might be nothing at all. And even though I've had the windows cleaned dozens of times, If you look at the back passenger window at just the right angle, you can still see what looks like faint handprints smeared down the glass. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Last week, I ran into another trucker at a rest stop who recognized my truck number. Before I could say anything, he asked me if I'd ever picked up a man in an army jacket on Highway 20. Turns out he'd had almost the exact same experience 2 months ago. Same spot, same fog, same words. Almost there. I don't know what to make of all this. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I know what I saw. And I know those handprints were real. I took photos of them the next morning, but they came out all blurry, like there was something wrong with my camera. When I tried to show them to my wife, they were just gone from my phone, like they'd never been there at all. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about where there is. Where was he trying to go? What happens when he finally gets there? And why does he keep appearing decades after his death, still trying to reach some destination he'll never find? I still drive that route because it's my job, but I never drive it at night anymore if I can help it. And every time I pass that spot, even in broad daylight, I can't help but glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale face staring back at me, pointing forward, whispering those words that still haunt my dreams. Almost there. I've been holding this in for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. My hands are literally shaking as I type this, but here goes. Last summer, my friends and I made the stupidest decision of our lives. We live in rural Minnesota, where there's nothing much to do except drive around back roads and find ways to kill time. That particular Saturday in August started like any other. Just me, Jake, Sarah, and Mike hanging out in Jake's basement playing video games and complaining about being bored. It was Sarah who first brought up the old Erickson barn. Everyone in town knew about it. This massive, creepy structure on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned since the 90s, when the Erickson family just up and left one day. There were all sorts of rumors about why they left, but nobody really knew the truth. The property had been tied up in some legal battle ever since. I'd driven past it hundreds of times on my way to school, but I'd never actually gone inside. It was this huge weather-beaten thing, all gray wood and rusty metal, kind of leaning to one side like it might collapse any day. Sarah mentioned she'd heard some kids from school had been sneaking in there at night, and somehow that turned into us deciding we should check it out ourselves. Looking back, I don't know why we thought going there at 6 p.m. was a good idea. Maybe because it was still light out, we thought it wouldn't be as creepy. Man, were we wrong. The sun was starting to set when we pulled up in Jake's pickup, casting these long shadows across the overgrown field. The barn looked even bigger up close, looming over us like some ancient monster. The air felt different there, heavy, if that makes sense. Like when a storm's about to hit, but the sky was clear. We had to push through these tall weeds to get to the main doors, and I remember the plants felt weirdly cold against my legs, even though it was like 80 degrees out. There was this smell, too. Not like normal barn smell, more like wet cardboard and something else I couldn't place. Mike managed to pull one of the doors open enough for us to squeeze through. The hinges made this awful screech that made my teeth hurt. Inside, it was this huge open space with old farm equipment scattered around, all covered in decades of dust and cobwebs. Bits of sunlight came through gaps in the walls, making these weird light beams in the dusty air. We were just kind of wandering around, looking at stuff and taking pictures on our phones, when Sarah pointed out this rickety wooden ladder leading up to the hayloft. We could see there was still some old hay up there, and what looked like some other junk. Jake dared Mike to go up first, and of course Mike couldn't back down from a dare. That's when things started getting weird. We were all laughing and joking around, but then suddenly Sarah grabbed my arm. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered. We all froze, and then we heard it. Footsteps clear as day moving across the floor above us. Not like animal footsteps either. These were definitely human. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking heel to toe. Jake tried to play it cool. "It's probably just some other kids," he said, but his voice was shaking. We all knew no one else had come in. We would have heard the door. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of the hayloft, right above where we were standing. I don't know what possessed us, but we decided to check it out. Maybe it was that thing where you're so scared you do stupid things just to prove you're not scared. Jake went up first this time, then Mike, then me with Sarah behind me. The ladder creaked with every step, and I remember thinking how easily it could break. The hayloft was bigger than it looked from below, with old hay scattered everywhere and these weird shadows in the corners where the light couldn't reach. But what caught our attention immediately was this rocking chair, right in the middle of the floor. It was still moving slightly, like someone had just gotten up from it. And around it, in the thick dust covering the floor, were fresh footprints, small ones, like a child's. We all just stood there, staring at the chair. Nobody wanted to say anything. The temperature seemed to drop about 20 degrees and I could see my breath. Then Sarah whispered, "Guys, look at the footprints. They just stopped, right at the chair, like whoever made them had just vanished." That's when we heard it, this voice, small and sweet and completely terrifying. "Come back and play." It sounded like it was coming from right behind us, but when we spun around there was nothing there, just more shadows and hay. We got out of there so fast I don't even remember climbing down the ladder. We just ran, practically falling over each other to get to Jake's truck. As we peeled out of there, I looked back at the barn. In the fading light, I swear I could see something in that hayloft window, just a small dark shape. We tried to convince ourselves it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. But a week later, Mike went back alone. Yeah, I know, terrible idea. He called me right after, freaking out. The chair had moved. It was closer to the edge of the hayloft, like it was waiting for someone. He took a picture, and when he showed it to us later, my blood ran cold. You could see these tiny handprints in the dust on the arms of the chair. We went back 3 more times over the next month. Don't ask me why. Maybe we were trying to prove to ourselves we weren't crazy. Each time the chair was closer to the edge. The last time we went, it was right at the edge of the hayloft, rocking slightly with those same small footprints around it in the dust. We heard that voice again, closer this time. "Please don't go. I'm so lonely." None of us have been back since then, but sometimes when I drive past the barn on my way to school, I glance up at that hayloft window. The chair isn't there anymore. But sometimes, just for a second, I see a small face looking back at me and my phone starts playing static. I still don't know what happened in that barn, or what we encountered. Part of me doesn't want to know. But I do know that every time I pass by, I drive a little faster. And I never ever look up at that window after dark. I noticed something else weird recently. I was looking through the pictures on my phone from that first day, and in every single one there's this weird blur in the background. It's always in a different place, but it's about the size of a small child. I tried showing the pictures to Jake last week, but when I opened my phone, they were all corrupted. Just static. The Erickson barn is still there, still abandoned. Sometimes I hear other kids at school talking about checking it out, and I want to tell them not to go. But I know they wouldn't believe me. Nobody would. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't experienced it myself. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because it's been getting harder to sleep lately. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice. "Come back and play." And sometimes in my dreams, I'm back in that hayloft and the chair is rocking, 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 getting closer to the edge with each swing. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to me last Tuesday night, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I know this might sound crazy, but I need to get this off my chest. I haven't been able to sleep properly since then, and every time I close my eyes, I see that grin. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was driving back home from visiting my sister in Cedar Rapids. I usually avoid driving this late, but she had an emergency with her kid, and I stayed longer than planned. The drive back to Des Moines normally takes about 2 hours on I-80, and I've done it dozens of times. But this time was different. So different that I haven't driven at night since then. The highway was practically empty, which isn't unusual for a Tuesday night. I had my music playing quietly, some random Spotify playlist, just to keep me company. The moon was barely visible behind the clouds, and there were long stretches where the only light came from my headlights and the occasional reflector on the road barriers. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just a deer. You know how they sometimes stand at the edge of the road? I slowed down instinctively. Hitting a deer out here would be a nightmare. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer at all. It was tall, too tall, maybe 7 feet, and completely black, like a shadow standing upright. I'm not talking about someone wearing dark clothes. This was different. It was like looking at a hole in reality. My hands started sweating on the steering wheel. I blinked hard, thinking I was just tired and seeing things. When I looked again, there was nothing there, just empty road and darkness. I let out this nervous laugh and turned up the music a bit. Classic sleep-deprived hallucination, right? I even texted my sister at the next rest stop. I pulled over, obviously, to joke about it. But then it happened again. About 15 minutes later, I saw the same figure, same place, right at the edge of the road. Only this time, it was closer to the highway. Close enough that my headlights should have illuminated it properly, but they didn't. The light just seemed to stop at its edges. I'm not making this up. I wish I was. My heart was really pounding now. I pressed the gas pedal harder, pushing my old Honda Civic past 80. The figure disappeared again as I got closer, but this time I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I checked my rearview mirror obsessively, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every time I checked the mirror, the figure was there, standing in the middle of the road. And every time, it was closer than before. I started counting the seconds between looks. 5 seconds, it was maybe 200 feet behind me. 10 seconds, 150 feet. 15 seconds, 100 feet. I was going over 80 miles per hour, but somehow it was gaining on me. I tried calling 911, but my phone showed no signal. Of course it didn't. I tried calling anyway, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. Nothing. The radio started crackling with static. I jabbed at it frantically, trying to get it to work, but it just got worse. The static started forming patterns that almost sounded like words, but not quite, like someone trying to speak through water. Then my car started to sputter. No, 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 not here, not now. The engine made this horrible choking sound, and all the dashboard lights started flickering. I've never maintained this car perfectly, but it had never done anything like this before. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, but it was no use. The car was dying. As the engine gave its final cough, I managed to coast to the shoulder. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the key. Please start, please start, please start, I kept whispering, but nothing happened. Just that awful clicking sound when the engine won't turn over. That's when I heard it. The whispers. They seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the vents, from outside the windows, from the back seat. They weren't in any language I recognized, but somehow they felt hungry. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. With trembling hands, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The figure was right there, just outside my back window. And it was grinning. God, that grin. It wasn't human. Wasn't anything that should exist in our world. It stretched too wide, had too many teeth, and seemed to glow with its own sickly light. Then everything went black. Not just the car lights, everything. Like someone had turned off the universe. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. The whispers got louder, and I felt something cold brush against my neck. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of a truck horn. It was morning. My car was parked perfectly straight on the shoulder, running smoothly like nothing had happened. My phone showed 6:47 a.m., full signal, several missed calls from my sister. The truck driver asked if I was okay, said he saw me sleeping in my car. I just nodded and drove home, hands shaking the entire way. I've checked my car multiple times since then. Took it to 2 different mechanics. They say everything's fine, nothing wrong with it at all. But sometimes when I'm sitting in traffic, I hear those whispers coming from the vents. And every time I look in my rearview mirror at night, I expect to see that grin. I don't drive at night anymore. I can't. And I keep wondering, what if it's still out there on that highway waiting for someone else to drive by? What if it wasn't just me? What if it's still following me, just waiting for the right moment to show that grin again? I know how this sounds. Believe me, I do. If someone told me this story a week ago, I would have thought they were making it up or had a weird dream. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. And I can't shake the feeling that somehow whatever that thing was, it let me go. Like it was just playing with its food. I still haven't told my sister the full story. Haven't told anyone really. How do you even begin to explain something like this? But I needed to write it down, to tell someone. Because every night since then I've been checking all my mirrors before I go to bed. And every night I wonder if tonight will be the night I see that grin again. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. What happened at my grandmother's farmhouse last month still keeps me up at night, and I'm hoping that writing about it might help me process everything. I've always been skeptical about paranormal stuff, but after what I experienced, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. My grandmother passed away earlier this year, and since I was her only grandchild, she left me her old farmhouse in rural Vermont. It's a beautiful place, honestly. One of those classic New England homes from the 1800s with white clapboard siding and black shutters. I hadn't visited since I was a teenager, but I remembered loving it there as a kid. The house had been sitting empty for a few months while the estate was being settled, so I decided to spend a weekend there to sort through her belongings and decide what to do with the property. I arrived around noon on a Friday. The drive up was gorgeous with all the fall colors starting to show, but as soon as I pulled into the long gravel driveway, something felt off. I can't really explain it. The air just felt heavy somehow, like right before a thunderstorm. I figured it was just emotional, being back there without her. The key was where it had always been, under a fake rock by the back steps. Walking in, I was hit with that musty smell old houses get when they've been closed up too long. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The worn hardwood floors, the faded wallpaper in the hallway. Even her collection of antique teacups, still arranged perfectly on the dining room shelves. But something about the familiar space felt wrong, like walking into your own house and finding all the furniture shifted slightly to the left. I spent most of the afternoon going through the main floor, sorting things into piles to keep, donate, or throw away. Around 4 p.m. I decided to tackle the attic. That's when things started getting weird. The pull-down attic stairs creaked badly as I climbed them, which I expected in an old house. What I didn't expect was the temperature drop. It had to be at least 15 degrees colder up there than the rest of the house. The attic was huge, running the full length of the house with small windows at either end, letting in dusty beams of late afternoon light. It was cluttered with the usual attic stuff: old furniture draped in sheets, boxes of Christmas decorations, trunks full of vintage clothes. But as I was making my way through the space, I noticed something odd about one of the walls. There was a slight gap between the floorboards and the wall, and when I shone my phone's flashlight on it, I could see that the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match up. I probably should have left it alone. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I started feeling along the wall. Sure enough, there was a slight give to one section. When I pressed harder, I heard a click, and a narrow door swung inward. A hidden room. My grandmother had never mentioned anything about a hidden room. The space beyond was tiny, maybe 6x8 feet, with a slanted ceiling following the roof line. Unlike the rest of the attic, this room was eerily organized. Everything was arranged with obsessive precision. Old photographs in neat rows on the walls, small trinkets and jewelry boxes lined up on a narrow shelf, and in the center, her old rocking chair. I remembered that chair from when I was little. She used to rock me to sleep in it, but I thought she'd gotten rid of it years ago. The photos caught my attention first. They were all of my grandmother, but something about them seemed wrong. In every single one, she was sitting in that rocking chair, wearing the same dress, a high-necked black thing with tiny pearl buttons. But the really unsettling part was her expression. In every photo, she was staring directly at the camera with this intense, almost angry look. I'd never seen her look like that. As I was studying the photos, I noticed writing on the back of one that had partially detached from the wall. When I carefully pulled it down to look, I saw it was covered in my grandmother's handwriting, but not her usual neat script. This was frenzied, the words crammed together and running into each other. I could only make out fragments. It won't let me leave and always watching and the chair knows. That's when I heard the first creak. I froze. It came from behind me, from the main attic space. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise, right? But then I heard it again, closer this time, and again. It sounded exactly like someone rocking in a chair. I spun around, but the doorway only showed the empty attic, growing darker as the sun set. The creaking continued, steady as a heartbeat. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then the temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. The creaking got faster, more aggressive, like someone was rocking frantically. That's when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The rocking chair in the room with me was empty, but its shadow on the wall showed someone sitting in it. I bolted. I didn't even bother with the attic stairs. I scrambled down them so fast I nearly fell. I ran straight out to my car and sat there with the engine running for almost an hour, trying to convince myself I was just spooked and imagining things. Eventually, I managed to talk myself into going back inside. I had to. My overnight bag was still in there, and it was a 2-hour drive back to Boston. The house seemed quiet when I went back in. Normal. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was a grown woman, for God's sake. I'd just gotten myself worked up looking at old photos in a creepy attic. I decided to take a hot shower to calm my nerves and then head to bed. My grandmother's old bedroom was on the first floor, and I figured that would be better than staying in one of the upstairs rooms closer to the attic. That's when things got really bad. I was just getting out of the shower when I heard it. That same creaking sound coming from directly above me. But this time it was accompanied by something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving from the attic toward the stairs. I stood there frozen, dripping wet, listening as they made their way down to the second floor. Then the first floor, getting closer. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. I wasn't breathing. Then I heard it. A soft scratch against the wood like someone running their fingernails down the door. And a voice barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably my grandmother's. "Sweet girl, why did you open the door? Now it's loose." I burst out of that bathroom so fast I nearly took the door off its hinges. I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, a tall, dark figure at the end of the hall. But I didn't stop to look. I ran straight for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The knob turned, but it was like something was holding it shut from the other side. The creaking started again, louder now, coming from everywhere at once. I ran to the kitchen hoping to get out through the back door, but stopped dead in my tracks. The rocking chair was there, in the middle of the kitchen floor. It was rocking violently, wood screaming against wood. And behind it, I still have trouble describing what I saw. It was like a shadow, but solid somehow. Tall and thin, with 2 long arms and fingers like twigs. Where its face should have been was just darkness. Deeper than any darkness I've ever seen. And I knew it was looking right at me. My grandmother was there too, or something wearing her form. She stood beside the chair, but she wasn't solid like the shadow thing. I could see through her. She was wearing that black dress from the photos, and her face. She was crying, but the tears were black, leaving dark stains down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice sounding like dead leaves scraping across pavement. I tried to keep it contained. In the room. In the chair. But you let it out, and now... The shadow thing moved. I don't mean it walked. It was just suddenly closer, those horrible long fingers reaching for me. I screamed and threw myself backward, crashing into the wall. My hand hit the light switch by pure chance. When the kitchen lights flicked on, everything vanished. The chair, the shadow, my grandmother, all gone. The house was suddenly, completely silent. I didn't stay to see if they'd come back. I ran out to my car, barefoot, still in my towel, and drove straight home to Boston. I left everything behind. My clothes, my phone charger, everything. I haven't been back since. I've tried researching the house's history, looking for any clues about what happened there. All I've found is that before my grandmother bought it in the 1960s, it had been empty for nearly a decade after the previous owners abandoned it suddenly, leaving all their belongings behind. No explanation was ever given. The worst part? Last week, I got a call from the realtor I'd hired to sell the place. She said when she went to do the initial walkthrough, she found something strange. That rocking chair was back in the hidden room, surrounded by new photos on the walls. Photos of me, all taken that night, all showing me sleeping in my grandmother's old bed. Photos that would have been taken after I'd already fled the house. I'm putting the house up for sale as is. I never want to set foot in there again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that creaking sound coming from somewhere in my apartment. And in the corner of my eye, I keep seeing something tall and dark, with fingers like twigs. I still get chills thinking about what happened last month. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I can't shake this feeling of dread every time my mind wanders back to that house. I need to write this down, even though my hands are shaking just thinking about it. It started as a regular weekend road trip with my college friends, Sarah, Mike, and James. We were heading to Sarah's sister's wedding in Vermont, leaving early to make a mini vacation out of it. The four of us had done these kinds of trips before, usually sticking to the main highways and only stopping at those generic rest areas with their identical fast food joints. Everything was normal until about 6 hours into our drive. We'd been playing stupid car games and sharing snacks when our GPS started acting weird. The screen kept glitching, and the route kept recalculating. Mike, who was driving, pulled over to try and fix it. That's when James mentioned he'd heard about this old town nearby called Millbrook that was supposed to be super haunted or whatever. He'd read about it on some obscure forum. Apparently, the whole place had practically emptied out in the 70s after a series of unexplained disappearances. I remember rolling my eyes. James was always into that kind of stuff, but Sarah seemed weirdly interested. She kept pestering Mike until he agreed to take the detour. "We're ahead of schedule anyway," she said. "What's the worst that could happen?" God, I wish I could go back to that moment and scream at us to stay on the highway. The turnoff to Millbrook wasn't even marked properly, just a worn wooden sign half hidden by overgrown branches. The road quickly turned from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt. The trees got thicker, pressing in on both sides of the road. My phone lost signal almost immediately, but none of us thought much of it at the time. The town itself looked like something frozen in time. Most of the buildings were from the 50s or 60s, their paint peeling and windows boarded up. There were maybe a handful of houses that looked lived in, but we didn't see a single person. No cars moved, no kids played. Even the air felt still, like the whole place was holding its breath. We parked near what used to be the town square. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under our feet and the distant caw of crows. Sarah wanted to take pictures for her Instagram whenever we got signal back, so we started walking around. That's when we noticed the house. It stood apart from the others, a large Victorian mansion set back from the road, partially hidden behind overgrown hedges. The weird thing was, while all the other abandoned buildings looked dead, this one seemed alive somehow. The windows were intact, and I swear I saw something move behind one of the curtains. But what really caught our attention were the lights. Even in the afternoon sun, we could see weird flickering coming from inside, like someone was walking around with a lantern. And then we heard it. Laughter. Not loud or obvious, but this soft, echoing sound that seemed to drift through the air like smoke. Mike wanted to leave. He kept saying something felt off, but James was already heading toward the front door and Sarah followed him. I didn't want to be the only one staying behind, so I went too. Stupid, stupid, stupid. The front door was unlocked. It shouldn't have been unlocked. The inside of the house was like a museum, dusty but perfectly preserved. The furniture was all there, covered with sheets. Family photos still hung on the walls. But something was wrong with them. In every single picture, the faces were turned away from the camera, or blurred or hidden in shadow. We moved through the rooms in a sort of trance. The laughter had stopped, but now there was this constant whispering, just on the edge of hearing, like multiple conversations happening just out of earshot. We tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind, but there wasn't any wind. In what looked like a study, we found a photo album on a desk. The leather was cracked with age, but the pages were intact. As we flipped through it, my stomach started to knot. The photos were all of people, dozens of them, standing in various places around town. They were dressed in clothes from different decades, but they all had the same vacant expression. And their eyes were completely white in every photo. That's when Sarah screamed. She was staring at one of the last photos, her face white as a sheet. The photo showed 4 young people standing in front of the house. It was dated 1973, but I swear to God, one of the girls looked exactly like Sarah. Not just similar, identical. Same face, same birthmark on her neck, same everything. The lights went out, all of them, at once. The sun had set without any of us noticing, and now we were in complete darkness. Our phones were dead. Even Mike's flashlight wouldn't work. The whispering got louder, and now we could make out words. Stay with us. You belong here. We've been waiting. Just like the others. We ran. At least we tried to. The house had changed somehow. Doors that we'd passed through before led to different rooms now. Hallways stretched impossibly long, and everywhere we went those whispers followed us, getting louder and more insistent. I don't remember how we got out. I have flashes. Sarah crying, Mike shoulder-checking a door, James stumbling and screaming that something was grabbing his legs. I remember the sound of our footsteps on the wooden floors, the feeling of cold hands brushing against my neck, and that goddamn whispering. We made it to the car somehow. Mike drove like a maniac until we hit the highway. None of us spoke for hours. When we finally got to the wedding, we made up some story about getting lost. What else could we say? Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. 2 weeks after we got back, I tried to find information about Millbrook online. Nothing. No forums, no ghost stories, no records. I even tried to find it on maps. The road we took doesn't exist. When I called James to ask about the forum where he'd read about the town, he had no idea what I was talking about. He swears he never suggested going there, says it was Sarah's idea, but Sarah says it was Mike who brought it up. And Mike hasn't answered his phone in 3 days. I keep checking that photo of Sarah I took on my phone from inside the house. The one where she's standing in the study, next to the desk with the album. In the picture, her face is turned away from the camera, but I know she was looking right at me when I took it. I've tried to convince myself it was just some elaborate prank, or a shared hallucination, or anything that would make sense. But I can't explain the photo I found in my jacket pocket yesterday. It's old, the edges yellowed and cracked. It shows 4 young people standing in front of a Victorian mansion. The date on the back says 2025. We haven't taken that trip yet. I've been hesitating to write about this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. What happened during our camping trip last October has been haunting me ever since. And Sarah, not her real name, suggested that writing about it might help me process everything. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. My girlfriend and I are pretty experienced campers. We usually go at least once a month during the warmer seasons. We've dealt with our fair share of wildlife encounters and sketchy weather, but nothing could have prepared us for what we experienced that night at Blackwood Creek Trail. The day started normally enough. We'd picked this particular spot because it was fairly remote, about a 3-hour drive from Portland, in a less popular area of the National Forest. We'd been looking to avoid the usual crowded campgrounds, and a colleague had mentioned this place was perfect for a peaceful weekend getaway. The weather forecast looked good. Clear skies, mild temperatures, perfect for late October camping. We arrived around 2 p.m. and spent a few hours setting up our campsite. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by towering pines and thick undergrowth. The nearest camping area was at least a mile away, and we hadn't seen another car on the dirt access road coming in. We set up our tent about 50 feet from where we parked, in a small clearing that gave us a decent view of the surrounding woods. Everything was fine until about 9:30 p.m. We'd had dinner, cleaned up, being careful about food storage because of bears, and were sitting by our dying campfire, enjoying some hot chocolate and planning our hike for the next day. The temperature had dropped considerably and there was this weird stillness in the air. You know that feeling when it's too quiet? Like the forest is holding its breath? That's when we first heard it. A rustling sound coming from behind our tent. At first I figured it was probably just a raccoon or something, but this sound was different. It wasn't the quick scurrying noise you usually hear from small animals. This was more deliberate, like something larger moving slowly through the underbrush. Sarah grabbed my arm and whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, trying to stay calm while mentally going through the list of local wildlife. Bear, mountain lion. But before I could really process it, something else caught our attention. A melody. I know how crazy this sounds, but there was this soft, haunting tune drifting through the trees. It wasn't like someone playing music on a phone or radio. This was different. It sounded like someone humming or singing very quietly, but the melody wasn't anything I recognized. It had this old, almost ancient quality to it. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe there were other campers nearby that we hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew this was something else. The melody seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sarah and I looked at each other, and I could see the same mix of curiosity and fear in her eyes that I was feeling. That's when we noticed a faint light through the trees, maybe about 100 yards from our campsite. It looked like an old-fashioned lantern, the kind that uses oil, giving off this warm, flickering glow. It wasn't moving, just hanging there in the darkness like it was waiting for something, or someone. "Should we check it out?" Sarah whispered. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was screaming at me to say no, but something about that light was compelling. It felt like it was calling to us specifically. Looking back, I wish we'd stayed put, but curiosity got the better of us. We grabbed our flashlights and slowly made our way toward the light. The singing got slightly louder as we approached, but it still had that distant, ethereal quality. The forest around us felt different now. The trees seemed taller, more imposing, and the shadows deeper than they should have been. Every step we took felt like we were moving through molasses, like the air itself had become thick and resistant. As we got closer to the lantern, that's when we saw her. About 20 feet beyond the light, there was a woman standing with her back to us. She was wearing what looked like a long white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. She was completely still except for a slight swaying motion, and the singing was definitely coming from her. The melody was clearer now, and it made my chest ache with a sadness I can't explain. I wanted to call out to her, to ask if she needed help, but my voice wouldn't work. It felt like speaking would break whatever strange spell had fallen over the forest. Sarah's grip on my arm was so tight it hurt, but I barely noticed it. We were both transfixed by the scene in front of us. Slowly, the woman turned her head, not her body, just her head, and what I saw in that moment will haunt me for the rest of my life. Her face was pale, almost luminescent in the lantern light, but her eyes were completely black, like empty spaces in reality. She was looking right at us, but also past us, into the deeper darkness of the forest. The singing stopped, and in that moment of silence, I swear I could hear my own heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Then, everything happened at once. The lantern went out with a sudden hiss, plunging us into complete darkness. The flashlights in our hands flickered and died simultaneously. The temperature dropped so drastically that I could see my breath in the beam of moonlight filtering through the trees. And the silence, it wasn't just quiet. It was like all sound had been sucked out of the world, but somehow this silence felt alive, like it was pressing against my eardrums. We ran. I don't remember making the conscious decision to run, but suddenly we were crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness. I couldn't tell if we were heading in the right direction, but at that point I didn't care, we just needed to get away. When we finally made it back to our campsite, everything looked normal. Our tent was still there, the embers of our fire still glowing faintly. Our flashlights were working again, though I don't remember them coming back on. The forest sounds had returned, crickets chirping, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was like nothing had happened. We spent the rest of the night in our tent, wide awake, listening to every sound. We didn't talk about what we'd seen. I think we were both afraid that speaking about it would somehow make it more real. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, we packed up and left. Here's the thing that still bothers me the most. When we were leaving, I noticed something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about that night. The area where we'd seen the woman and the lantern, it should have been visible from the road. But in the daylight, I could see that the terrain in that direction dropped off into a steep ravine. There was no way anyone could have been standing where we saw her. Sarah and I have tried researching the area since then, looking for any local legends or similar experiences, but we haven't found anything concrete. We haven't been camping since that night, and honestly, I'm not sure when or if we'll go again. Sometimes when it's really quiet at night, I think I can hear that melody again, just at the edge of my hearing. And sometimes in my dreams, I see those black eyes staring not at me, but through me, like they're seeing something terrible approaching from a great distance. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told it to me. But I know what we experienced that night was real, even if I can't explain it. Whatever that woman was, whatever she was warning us about or leading us to, I'm grateful we didn't stick around to find out. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I still get chills thinking about what happened that day in the Blackwood Forest. It's been 3 months and I've debated whether to share this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. My friends and I had been planning this hike for weeks. It was supposed to be a simple day trip, just me, Sarah, Mike, and Tom, exploring one of the lesser-known trails about 2 hours from the city. We'd done plenty of hikes before, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened on that trail. We got to the trailhead around 10 a.m. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the weather forecast predicted clear skies all day. The trail wasn't marked on any official maps, but Tom had heard about it from some locals who said it offered amazing views. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags when we noticed there were no other cars in the parking area, but we just thought we'd gotten lucky. The first couple of hours were actually pretty great. The forest was dense but beautiful, with old-growth trees towering above us. We took some photos, shared trail mix, and just enjoyed being away from the city. Everything changed around 2 p.m. I was walking behind Sarah when I first heard it, a laugh that sounded like it came from somewhere among the trees. It wasn't particularly loud, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It sounded almost childlike, but not quite right, like someone trying to imitate a kid's laugh but not quite getting it right. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. Everyone stopped walking. "Yeah, probably just some other hikers," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We stood there for a moment, listening. The forest had gotten weirdly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. We kept walking, but now there was this tension in the air. The laugh came again, closer this time, and definitely not from the direction of the trail. Sarah grabbed my arm and I could feel her hand shaking. That's when we started noticing the symbols. They were carved into the tree trunks, not fresh carvings, but old ones that had grown with the trees. They looked like crosses between triangles and spirals, but somehow wrong, like they hurt your eyes if you looked at them too long. Tom tried to take a picture of one, but his phone kept glitching every time he pointed it at the symbols. The sun was starting to set earlier than it should have. I checked my phone. It was only 3:30 p.m., but the shadows were stretching like it was early evening. The trees seemed to be getting thicker, closing in around us. We decided to turn back. That's when things got really messed up. We turned around to retrace our steps, but the trail just wasn't there anymore. Instead of the clear path we'd been following, there were just more trees, more symbols, and more shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Mike tried using his phone's GPS, but it showed us in completely different locations every time he checked. Sarah's phone was dead, even though she'd started the hike with a full charge. Tom's phone kept showing the same glitchy screen it had when he tried to photograph the symbols. The laughter started getting more frequent. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from right behind us. Other times it seemed to echo from all directions at once. We huddled together and tried to walk in what we thought was the direction back to the trailhead. But every time we thought we were making progress, those symbols would appear again, mocking us. The worst part was the shadows. As it got darker, they started moving in ways that shadows shouldn't. They would stretch toward us when we passed, like fingers trying to grab our ankles. Several times I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just at the edge of my vision, but every time I turned to look, it was gone. Around what felt like 6 p.m., our phones were all either dead or malfunctioning by then. The laughter changed. It wasn't trying to sound childlike anymore. It was deeper, almost guttural, and it was getting closer. We started running, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about direction anymore, just trying to get away from that sound. That's when we saw them, eyes reflecting in the darkness between the trees. Not animal eyes, they were too high up, too aware. They blinked in sequence like they were communicating with each other. The symbols on the trees started to look like they were glowing faintly, pulsing in the same sequence as the blinks. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they were about to give out. We ended up huddled against a massive old tree trying to catch our breath. The laughter had stopped, but now there was this low humming sound, like power lines but somehow organic. It made my teeth hurt. Sarah was crying silently. Mike kept mumbling something about how this couldn't be happening. Tom just stared straight ahead, completely frozen. I felt like I could sense something watching us, waiting for something, but I couldn't tell what. Then, just as suddenly as it had all started, everything stopped. The humming cut out like someone had flipped a switch. The shadows snapped back to where they should have been. Through the trees, we could see lights, the parking lot lights. Somehow we were back where we'd started. We practically sprinted to our car. None of us spoke on the drive home. When we finally checked our phones after getting back to cell service, they all worked perfectly fine. The timestamps on our last photos showed we'd only been in the forest for about 4 hours, but it had felt like days. We've tried researching the area since then, looking up the symbols, the history of the forest, anything that might explain what happened. We found nothing. The trail we took doesn't show up on any maps, and when we tried to drive back a week later to document everything, we couldn't even find the turnoff to the parking area. I still have nightmares about those eyes in the darkness, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear that laugh. Sarah won't talk about it at all. Mike moved to another state. Tom threw himself into research about local folklore but hasn't found anything that matches what we experienced. The strangest thing? When we got home that night and checked our phones, we found one photo that none of us remember taking. It's mostly black, but in one corner you can barely make out what looks like a symbol carved into a tree. It's not one of the ones we saw in the forest. It's different somehow. And every time I try to show it to someone, my phone freezes and shuts down. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, sometimes I wake up and don't believe it myself. But I know what we experienced was real. Something was out there in those woods. Something that was playing with us, hurting us, maybe even testing us. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it let us leave. Or if we're still there, just experiencing some kind of shared delusion of escape. If you know anything about similar experiences or recognize the symbols I described, please reach out. But whatever you do, if you're hiking and hear laughter in the woods, even if it sounds like children playing, turn back immediately. Some trails aren't meant to be followed. I've been a photographer for almost 15 years now, specializing in architectural photography, particularly old buildings and estates. What happened last week at the Blackwood Manor has made me question everything I thought I knew about reality, and I honestly don't know if I'll ever be able to pick up my camera again. I had been commissioned to photograph the estate for a local historical society before its renovation. It was a fairly standard job: document the current state of the building, capture its architectural details, that sort of thing. The manor had been empty for about 8 years, but it was still in decent shape, just dusty and a bit neglected. I arrived early that morning, around 7 a.m., wanting to catch the best morning light. The caretaker let me in with a set of keys and basic instructions about which areas were structurally safe to enter. He warned me about loose floorboards and told me to stay out of the west wing, which was being assessed for water damage. Pretty standard stuff for these old places. The first few hours were completely normal. I worked my way through the ground floor, photographing the grand entrance hall, the library, and the dining room. The light was perfect, streaming through the tall windows and highlighting all the ornate moldings and architectural details. I was actually having a great time, despite the musty smell and the thick layer of dust covering everything. It wasn't until I reached the second floor that things started getting weird. I was setting up a shot in what looked like an old master bedroom. The room was huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows and this massive antique mirror mounted on one wall. It was one of those ornate Victorian ones, probably original to the house, with an elaborately carved golden frame that was now dulled with age and grime. I was adjusting my camera settings when I noticed something odd in my peripheral vision. You know that feeling when something moves just at the edge of your sight, but when you turn to look, nothing's there. It was like that, except when I looked up at the mirror, my reflection seemed delayed. Just by a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. I initially brushed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. Old houses can do that to you, especially when you're working alone. But then I saw it. My shadow in the mirror wasn't matching my movements. I was standing still, adjusting my lens, but my shadow was shifting. At first it was subtle, just small movements that could have been explained away by the angle of the sun or my tired eyes. But then it raised its arm while both of mine were firmly on my camera. I froze. Complete deer in headlights freeze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shadow in the mirror was definitely moving independently now. It raised both arms in what looked like a pushing motion, pointing toward the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The shadow became more agitated, its gestures more urgent. My photographer's instincts kicked in. Stupid, I know, but when you've spent years documenting everything you see, it becomes almost automatic. I raised my camera and took a photo. The flash lit up the room for a split second, and what I saw in that burst of light will haunt me forever. The shadow in the mirror had stretched toward me, its form elongated and distorted, with hands reaching out of the glass like it was trying to grab me. I ran. I just ran. Dropped my tripod, clutched my camera to my chest, and bolted out of that room as fast as I could. I stopped in the hallway, trying to catch my breath and convince myself I was just seeing things. That's when I noticed the decorative mirror hanging on the wall opposite me. My shadow was there too, but it wasn't my reflection. It was that same distorted shape, pressing against the glass. I turned and ran down the stairs, but every mirror I passed, and this house had a lot of them, showed the same thing. My shadow was following me, moving from mirror to mirror, always reaching, always trying to get out. In the entrance hall, there was a large mirror above the fireplace. As I ran past it, I swear I felt something cold brush against my shoulder, like fingers just barely missing their grip. I made it outside and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, got in, and drove away so fast I'm surprised I didn't get pulled over. I called the caretaker once I was a safe distance away and made up some excuse about feeling sick. He was understanding and said we could reschedule. That was a week ago. I haven't been able to look in a mirror since then. I cover all the reflective surfaces in my house with sheets. I can't even look at my phone screen when it's turned off, afraid of what I might see in the black reflection. The worst part? I still have that photo on my memory card. I haven't looked at it. I can't bring myself to. The card is locked in my desk drawer, and sometimes at night, I swear I can hear scratching coming from inside. I don't know what was in that house or what it wanted. I don't know if it was trying to warn me about something worse or if it was trying to harm me itself. All I know is that sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of my reflection in a window or a puddle, my shadow doesn't quite match my movements anymore. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see it turn its head to look at me when I'm not moving at all. I've tried researching the history of Blackwood Manor, looking for similar experiences or any explanations, but I've found nothing concrete. Just vague mentions of previous owners leaving suddenly and a few unsubstantiated rumors about people going missing on the property over the years. Part of me wants to go back, to understand what happened, but I know that would be insane. Whatever was there, whatever is still following me in reflections, it's better left alone. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened. I need to know I'm not crazy. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Has anyone else seen their shadow move independently in mirrors? And most importantly, does anyone know how to make it stop? Because I swear, right now, as I'm typing this on my laptop, I can see my shadow in the black screen when I pause typing, and it's not matching my movements anymore. It's watching me. Always watching. I never wanted to write about what happened to me that day in Blackwood Trail, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 3 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats, questioning everything I experienced. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar and can help me make sense of it. I'm an experienced hiker, been doing solo trails for over 8 years now. That morning started like any other hike. I'd checked the weather, cloudy but stable, packed my usual gear, backpack with water, protein bars, first aid kit, portable charger, etc., and let my sister know my planned route. The trail wasn't particularly challenging. I'd done it twice before, but something felt different from the moment I stepped out of my car at 7:30 a.m. The air was heavy, almost sticky. You know that feeling right before a storm? It was like that, but worse. The fog was rolling in, which wasn't unusual for October in this area, but it seemed to move differently. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but it moved like it had a purpose. I'd been walking for about an hour when things started getting weird. The fog had gotten thicker, but I wasn't worried. I had my GPS and knew the trail well. Then my phone died, just completely shut off. Weird, since I'd charged it fully the night before and barely used it. My portable charger was dead too. Still, I figured I'd just follow the trail markers back if needed. That's when I heard it. My own voice calling out from somewhere in the fog. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I froze. It wasn't an echo. The voice came from about 50 feet ahead of me. I know what my voice sounds like, and that was definitely it. My first thought was that maybe someone was playing a recording, but who would do that? And how would they have a recording of my voice? I called out, "Who's there?" and immediately regretted it because my voice came back at me from 3 different directions, all at slightly different times. Who's there? Who's there? Who's there? Each one sounded exactly like me, but with subtle differences. One sounded scared, another angry, the third almost mocking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned around to head back to the trailhead, but the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. My blue Nalgene water bottle lying on the ground about 20 feet away. The same water bottle that was supposed to be in my backpack. With shaking hands, I checked my backpack. My water bottle was still there. I looked back at the one on the ground. Same dents, same stickers, even the same scratch across the Nalgene logo from when I dropped it on some rocks last summer. I walked over and picked it up. It was still cold with condensation on the outside, just like mine. I started walking faster, trying to find my way back, when I saw another one of my belongings, the red bandana I always carry, hanging from a tree branch. Then my protein bar wrapper, looking freshly discarded, my spare phone cable, my hiking hat. all scattered in different directions, like breadcrumbs in some twisted trail. But every time I checked, the original items were still in my backpack. The voices kept coming. Sometimes they sounded distant, sometimes so close it felt like someone was whispering in my ear. They were all my voice, but saying things I hadn't said. You need to keep going. Don't look behind you. You're almost there. Remember what happened last time? Last time? What last time? I'd never experienced anything like this before. I tried to stay calm and logical. I took out my compass, but the needle just kept spinning. The temperature seemed to drop rapidly. I could see my breath now, even though it had been mild just minutes ago. The fog was getting thicker, if that was even possible, and it seemed to pulse with a faint greenish tint. Then I found my backpack. Not the one on my shoulders, another one, identical to mine, propped against a tree. Inside was everything I'd packed that morning, arranged exactly the same way I always arrange my gear. Even the small tear in the front pocket was the same. I found another one about 50 feet away. And another, each one identical, each one containing the exact same items arranged the exact same way. The voices were getting more insistent now, overlapping each other. You need to choose. Not that way. Remember, you're going in circles. Help me. Some sounded desperate, others angry, a few seemed to be laughing, all in my voice. I started running. I don't know for how long. The voices followed, getting louder and more distorted. I tripped over something, another one of my backpacks, and fell hard. When I looked up, I saw myself standing about 30 feet away in the fog. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Me, wearing the exact same clothes, staring back. Then another figure of me appeared to the left, and another to the right. They just stood there watching, their features slightly distorted by the fog. I closed my eyes and pressed my hands against my ears, curled up on the ground. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. My whole body was shaking, partly from cold, partly from terror. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong, like all the sound has been sucked out of the world. I opened my eyes. The fog was lifting, dissolving like smoke. As it cleared, I realized I was back at the trailhead parking lot, sitting right next to my car. My watch showed 11:47 a.m. Only about 4 hours had passed since I started hiking. Everything in my backpack was exactly as I'd packed it. My phone turned on normally, showing a full charge. The weather was mild again, the sun peeking through normal clouds. There was no sign of fog anywhere. I've been back to that trail several times since then, always with other people, never alone. Everything looks normal. The rangers say they've never had any similar reports. I've checked local history, paranormal websites, hiking forums. Nothing even close to what I experienced. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear my own voice whispering from the corners of my room. Remember what happened last time? And I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened that day isn't over. That somewhere in that fog, other versions of me are still walking that trail, leaving behind breadcrumbs of their own. I know how this all sounds. I've replayed it in my head countless times, trying to find a logical explanation. Carbon monoxide, some kind of toxic fog, hallucinations from dehydration or fatigue. But I was well rested, well prepared, and the weather reports from that day show nothing unusual. I still have the photos on my phone from the start of the hike. Normal forest shots, nothing unusual. But there's one image, the last one from that day, that I can't explain. It's blurry and dark, but you can make out multiple identical backpacks scattered on the ground. I don't remember taking it. I've thought about posting it here, but every time I try to upload it, my phone crashes. If anyone has experienced something similar, or knows anything about what might have happened, please let me know. I need to understand what happened that day. And why, sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch my reflection mouthing words I'm not saying. I still get chills every time I think about what happened that night in the cabin. It's been 3 months, but I can't shake the feeling of that cold breath on my neck. I know how this might sound, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe writing about it will help me process everything. I'd been going through a rough patch after my divorce and needed some time alone to clear my head. My coworker Sarah mentioned her family owned this cabin in northern Michigan that they rarely used anymore. She offered to let me stay there for a weekend, saying it would be the perfect place to disconnect and reset. The cabin was pretty remote, about 30 minutes from the nearest town, deep in the woods off an unmarked dirt road. Looking back, I should have been more cautious about going alone, but I was desperate for solitude. I arrived around 4 p.m. that Friday. The drive up was beautiful, with fall colors everywhere and barely any other cars on the road. The cabin itself was exactly what you'd expect. Rustic, one story, with a small porch wrapped around the front. Nothing fancy, just the basics. A main room with a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and a bedroom. The furniture was old, but clean enough. No TV or internet, just like Sarah had warned me. My phone had a weak signal. Enough for emergency calls, but that's about it. I spent the afternoon settling in, reading on the porch and watching the sunset through the trees. The silence was incredible. You don't realize how much background noise fills your life until it's gone. Just birds, wind in the trees, and occasional rustling from small animals. It was exactly what I needed. As it got dark, I made dinner using the supplies I'd brought, just some pasta and canned sauce. I remember checking all the windows and doors before settling in, not out of fear but habit. The cabin had these old-fashioned locks that used actual keys, and the windows had simple latches. I remember thinking they seemed flimsy, but I brushed it off. I was in the middle of nowhere after all. I got into bed around 10 p.m., feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The bedroom window was cracked open slightly to let in the cool autumn air. I could hear crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was perfect. That's when everything changed. The first sound was so faint I almost missed it. A soft creak from the porch boards, like someone taking a careful step. My eyes snapped open, but I told myself it was just the wood settling. Then I heard another creak and another. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving along the porch. My heart started racing. I lay perfectly still, straining to listen. The steps continued, moving past my bedroom window, then around to the back of the cabin, then to the other side. It was like someone was doing a slow lap around the building. I kept telling myself it must be a large animal, a deer maybe, or even a bear. But the rhythm was too perfect, too human. I grabbed my phone. 1 bar of signal. I pulled up the flashlight app and got out of bed as quietly as I could. The footsteps were still circling, now coming back around to the front. I crept to the bedroom window and peeked out through a gap in the curtains. The porch was clearly visible in the moonlight, but there was nothing there. Nothing. Yet I could still hear the footsteps, clear as day, passing right below my window. My hands were shaking as I moved to the main room. Every window I checked showed the same thing. An empty porch, but footsteps that couldn't be denied. I even worked up the courage to flip on the porch light and open the front door a crack. Nothing. Just darkness and trees and those continuing footsteps. I retreated to the bedroom, my mind racing. Should I try to make a run for my car? Should I call 911 with my barely there signal and try to explain that I could hear someone walking who wasn't there? I decided to barricade myself in the bedroom. I pushed a heavy dresser in front of the door and wedged a chair under the window latch. The footsteps continued for hours. Sometimes they'd stop for a few minutes and I'd start to hope it was over. Then they'd begin again, that same measured pace around and around the cabin. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall, clutching my phone, watching the battery slowly drain. Around 3 a.m. something changed. The footsteps stopped their circuit and seemed to focus on my bedroom window. I heard the latch jiggle slightly. Then the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in the air. That's when I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me, exhaling slowly. I scrambled off the bed so fast I fell to the floor. There was nothing there, but the cold spot remained, and I swear I could feel something watching me. I huddled in the corner of the room as far from the bed as I could get, and stayed there until the first light of dawn started to appear. As the sun rose, the oppressive feeling of being watched gradually lifted. The footsteps had stopped. The temperature returned to normal. I waited until full daylight before moving the dresser and leaving the bedroom. What I saw then made my blood run cold. There were muddy footprints on the floor, adult-sized barefoot prints that led from my bedside to the front door. They weren't there the night before, I'm absolutely certain. But here's the thing that still haunts me. They only went one way. There were no prints coming from the door to the bed, just from the bed to the door, as if whatever made them had materialized right next to where I was sleeping. I grabbed my bags and ran to my car. I didn't even bother locking up. I just had to get out of there. On the drive home, I called Sarah to tell her what happened and to apologize for leaving without cleaning up. There was a long pause after I finished my story. Then she told me something that made everything even worse. Her family hadn't actually owned that cabin for almost 15 years. They'd sold it after her grandfather died. As far as she knew, no one had lived there since. The place had been abandoned, tied up in some kind of legal dispute. She'd only mentioned it in passing during our conversation, talking about childhood memories. She never offered it to me for the weekend. We both realized we'd been talking about completely different places. I've tried researching the history of that area, but there's not much to find. I can't even be sure I could find the cabin again. I wasn't paying attention to the unmarked turns I took that day, but sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I swear I can hear those footsteps starting again, slow and deliberate, moving around and around. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know whose cabin I actually stayed in, or what was walking around it, or why it seemed so interested in me. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt, and I know those footprints were real. I haven't been camping or anywhere near the woods since then. Some part of me is afraid that if I do, whatever it was might realize I'm back and find me again. The strangest part? About a week after it happened, I found small patches of dried mud on my sheets, in the exact pattern of barefoot prints, right next to where I slept that night. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night at Pine Shadow Campground 3 months ago. My wife Sarah and I had taken our kids, Emma, 12, and Lucas, 9, camping there since it was recommended by a colleague who knew we were looking for somewhere off the beaten path. We wanted to avoid the crowded state parks and really give our kids that authentic camping experience. You know, just our family surrounded by nature. God, I wish we'd just gone to one of those busy campgrounds instead. The drive there was longer than expected. We'd left Portland around 2 p.m., but between traffic and the increasingly rough Forest Service roads, we didn't arrive until almost 6. The campground was exactly what we'd hoped for. Primitive but beautiful, with only 5 designated sites spread far apart. The camp host's cabin was empty with a sign saying they'd be back tomorrow, but our spot was marked as reserved on the board, so we started setting up at Site 4. It was a gorgeous spot, tucked against old-growth pines with a small clearing perfect for our family-sized tent. Sarah and I got everything set up while the kids explored the immediate area, within our sight, of course. The temperature was dropping fast as the sun set, so we got a fire going and made hot dogs and s'mores. It was exactly the kind of evening we'd imagined. Lucas telling his made-up stories, Emma pretending to be too cool for them, but secretly smiling, Sarah taking pictures of everything. Around 10 p.m., we got the kids ready for bed. Our tent was pretty spacious, one of those tall cabin-style ones where adults can almost stand up straight. We had it divided with our sleeping area on one side and the kids on the other. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, but we were cozy in our sleeping bags. I remember checking my phone, no signal of course, and seeing it was 11:47 p.m. when I finally started drifting off. The first knock came at 12:13 a.m. I know because I checked my phone immediately, thinking maybe a branch had fallen against the tent. It was distinct though, 3 quick taps, like someone using their knuckles on the tent wall near our feet. Sarah stirred beside me and I whispered, "Did you hear that?" She nodded in the darkness. We waited, barely breathing, straining our ears. The campground had been silent except for the usual nighttime forest sounds, the soft rustle of wind through pines, the occasional hoot of an owl. But now it felt different. The normal sound seemed to have stopped entirely. Another set of knocks came, this time from the side of the tent near Emma's head. She sat up immediately. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear the fear in it. "It's okay, honey. Probably just some animal curious about the tent." I didn't believe that for a second, but what else could I say? I reached for the flashlight we'd kept between our sleeping bags. The knocking came again, harder this time from the opposite side. Lucas started crying quietly. Sarah pulled him close while I unzipped our sleeping bags. The temperature in the tent seemed to have dropped even further. I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my racing heart. "Is someone there?" The only response was another series of knocks, now from the front of the tent near the door. They were faster, more insistent. I crawled toward the tent door, my hand shaking as I reached for the zipper. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered. But I had to know. I had to see what was out there. I pulled the zipper up just enough to peek out. The moonlight was bright enough to see our campsite clearly, but there was nobody there. Just our chairs around the dead fire, the cooler secured in the car, trees swaying gently in the breeze. I was about to close the flap when I noticed something strange about the ground around our tent. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing. Handprints. Dozens of them pressed into the dirt and pine needles, forming a perfect circle around our tent. They looked fresh, as if someone, or something, had just placed them there. Some were large, like an adult's hands, others smaller, like a child's. All of them pointed inward toward our tent. The knocking started again, but now it was everywhere at once, all around us, like we were surrounded by invisible people hammering on every surface of the tent. Lucas started screaming and Emma was crying, "Make it stop, make it stop." Sarah pulled them both close, trying to cover their ears. I grabbed my phone, desperately hoping for even one bar of signal. But there was nothing. The knocking grew louder, more violent, and now I could hear something else. Laughter. Not joyful laughter, but something wrong. High-pitched and distorted, like a child's laugh played at the wrong speed. It seemed to be coming from the woods all around us, getting closer. "We're leaving. Now." I started grabbing whatever I could reach. Phones, car keys, shoes. Sarah understood immediately and helped the kids into their jackets and shoes. The knocking and laughter continued as we frantically prepared to abandon our site. I counted to 3, then yanked the tent door open. We ran to the car, the kids in front with Sarah and me bringing up the rear. I fumbled with the keys but finally got the doors unlocked. As we piled in, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of our campsite. Just shadows, maybe, but they seemed to be moving in ways shadows shouldn't. The car started on the first try, thank God. I threw it into reverse and got us out of there as fast as I safely could on the dark forest road. The laughter followed us, I swear it did, growing fainter as we put distance between us and the campsite, until finally it faded away completely. We drove straight home, making it back to Portland just as the sun was rising. We left everything behind, the tent, sleeping bags, all our camping gear. I couldn't care less about any of it. Sarah called the Forest Service later that morning to report what happened, but they just said they'd look into it. When I checked online a few days later, I found that Pine Shadow Campground had been closed indefinitely due to maintenance issues. The strangest part? The handprints on my children's windows. Every few weeks, usually just after midnight, we'll wake up to the sound of soft knocking and find fresh handprints on the outside of their bedroom windows, even though we live on the second floor. They're always gone by morning, leaving no trace, but I know what I've seen. We're moving next month to a new city, hoping to leave this all behind. But sometimes late at night I still hear that laughter, distant but getting closer, and I wonder if distance will be enough. I don't know what was out there that night. I don't want to know. But I won't ever go camping again, and I've warned everyone I know to stay away from Pine Shadow. Some places should just be left alone.